Toxic Mom texted, "We changed all the locks on the front door and also the gate code. You are dead to us." I read the glowing letters on my phone screen. The rain drummed a heavy, relentless rhythm against the windshield of my idling car. I looked up through the wrought-iron gates of the sprawling estate. White canvas tents billowed in the cold autumn wind. Caterers carried silver trays across the manicured lawn. Preparing for my younger sister Kelsey's lavish engagement gala, my mother, Sylvia, sent that text to establish absolute dominance. She intended to discard me, the daughter she treated as a disposable financial safety net, and lock me out of their high society weekend. She thought she had stripped me of my dignity and my home. I simply smirked and whispered to the empty car. "Noted, that was clever. But I believe you forgot one fatal thing." As a senior cybersecurity architect, I built the digital fortress protecting that property. I reached into my leather tote, pulled out my laptop, and rested it on the steering wheel. My fingers flew across the keyboard. Within 30 seconds, I connected to the outer security network and ran a quick diagnostic. The primary gate database responded instantly. I executed a secure override command. Watching my dashboard display a comforting status message, "Admin status restored." I didn't open the gates yet. I didn't want them to know I was watching. But the digital keys to my own kingdom were firmly back in my hands. The trap was set. Have you ever watched a toxic family member confidently walk straight into a trap of their own making? Let me know your story in the comments below, and hit that like and subscribe button to watch this exact trap snap shut. To understand the sheer arrogance required for Sylvia to lock me out of that estate, we have to rewind the timeline by 12 years. The year was 2014. I was 23 years old, working 80 hours a week at a boutique tech firm, eating stale ramen, and sleeping on a secondhand mattress. Sylvia was spiraling. She had maxed out her credit cards, attempting to maintain a facade of generational wealth after my father passed away, leaving us drowning in hidden debt. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings on the family estate. Sylvia wept on my cheap apartment floor. She clutched her designer handbag, begging me to save her social standing. She could not bear the humiliation of her country club peers discovering her bankruptcy. I possessed the capital. I had engineered a piece of encryption software right out of college, selling it for a substantial sum. I took that capital and purchased the foreclosed property straight from the bank. But I did not hand the deed to Sylvia, even at 23. I understood her toxic nature. I structured the purchase through a blind legal entity called the Ironwood Trust. I became the absolute legal owner, and I allowed my mother and my younger sister to remain in the house. I paid the exorbitant property taxes, the maintenance fees, and the utility bills in exchange. I demanded one simple condition: financial accountability. I demanded she stop squandering money on useless luxury. Sylvia despised me for it. She accepted my money, lived under my roof, and spent the next 12 years systematically gaslighting me. She hid my ownership from everyone, to the outside world, and to my pampered sister, Kelsey. Sylvia remained the affluent matriarch who owned the sprawling manor. I became the embarrassing, middle-class corporate drone who visited on holidays. If I brought up the mortgage payments, she changed the subject, accusing me of lacking grace and fixating on petty numbers. She relegated me to the far end of the dining table, dismissing my career as unfeminine. I absorbed the insults. I paid the bills. I stayed quiet. I valued duty over drama. I believed my silent endurance would eventually earn a shred of maternal respect. I allowed her to spin her web of lies, prioritizing family loyalty over my own boundaries. I spent 12 years shrinking myself to fit into the dark corners of my own home so she could shine in the center of it. Now, the timeline was shifting, and the boundaries I had spent a decade shrinking were about to expand. I reached for the gear shift. I wasn't going to sit outside under the pouring rain and let them witness my presence. They chose to declare war, unaware they just handed the launch codes to an apex predator. The tires hissed against the wet asphalt as I pulled away from the wrought-iron gates, leaving the towering estate and its catering tents behind in the downpour. I drove 2 miles down the road, pulling into the parking lot of a quiet, independent coffee shop. The rain streaked the storefront windows. Inside, The air smelled of roasted beans and damp wool. I claimed a corner booth facing the door, ordered a black espresso, and flipped open my laptop. To understand the architecture of this betrayal, you must examine the parasites feeding on the host. Kelsey, at 29 years old, treated her existence as a spectator sport. She never submitted a resume. She never punched a time clock. She curated a hollow illusion of generational wealth, coasting on the stability I secretly provided. I observed her behavior with the same clinical detachment I used to audit compromised networks. Kelsey treated our family home like a luxury hotel, and me like the invisible staff. She spent her days lounging on the patio furniture I purchased, scrolling through social media, and demanding absolute compliance from everyone in her orbit. She operated under the arrogant assumption that the estate, the catered meals, and the pristine landscaping simply materialized out of thin air. Sylvia nurtured this delusion, shielding Kelsey from the reality of their bankruptcy to ensure her golden child remained flawless and untethered by responsibility. Then Trent breached our perimeter. Trent was 36 years old. He carried the title of tech startup founder like a shield, weaponizing it to demand immediate respect. He arrived at our Sunday dinners driving a loud, leased sports car, deliberately parking it sideways across the driveway to ensure the neighbors noticed the hood ornament. He wore custom-tailored suits and an oversized platinum watch, but my profession trains me to look past the interface and scrutinize the underlying code. I noticed the jagged scratch across the bezel of that expensive watch, a defect a man of actual wealth would repair immediately. I noticed the frayed stitching near the cuffs of his tailored shirts. He projected the aura of a Silicon Valley titan, but he radiated the frantic, vibrating energy of a man desperately running out of time. The turning point occurred a month prior, during a formal family dinner in the estate's formal dining room. The four of us sat beneath the crystal chandelier. Sylvia poured expensive red wine, hanging on to Trent's every word as he boasted about disrupting cloud infrastructure. Trent's smartphone rested next to his wine glass. Halfway through the main course, the screen illuminated. An unknown number flashed across the glass. Trent stopped chewing. The muscles in his jaw locked tight. He snatched the device, silenced the ringer with a violent, aggressive jabbing of his thumb, and shoved it deep into his jacket pocket. He offered a hollow, strained smile and took a large gulp of his wine. 3 minutes later, the device vibrated against the fabric of his suit. Trent threw his linen napkin onto his plate. He muttered a sharp, incoherent excuse, pushed his chair back, and marched out through the French doors onto the stone patio. I watched him through the glass panes. The autumn wind whipped at his expensive jacket. He paced the length of the terrace with rapid, erratic strides. He jabbed his index finger into the air. His face flushed a deep, violent shade of red. His mouth moved in rapid, aggressive bursts, screaming at whoever waited on the other end of the line. A man securing multi-million-dollar venture capital deals does not scream at unknown callers in the dark. He was dodging debt collectors. I ran a passive background query on him the very next morning. The search results returned a digital graveyard of abandoned limited liability companies and a staggering, heavily documented trail of unpaid independent contractors. Trent was not building an empire. He was running a grift. Kelsey completely ignored her fiancé's patio meltdown. She dragged her mahogany chair closer to mine and dropped a thick, glossy travel brochure directly onto my dinner plate. The cover displayed a sprawling overwater bungalow suspended above a turquoise ocean. "We need to secure the deposit by Tuesday," Kelsey stated. She did not look at me. Her eyes remained fixed on her own reflection in her phone screen, tapping her manicured nails against the glass. "Trent is handling the catering for the engagement gala, so you need to cover the celebration trip to the Maldives. It is customary for the older sister to contribute." I picked up the brochure. I scanned the glossy pages, my eyes catching the staggering 5-figure price tag printed at the bottom. I placed the heavy paper back onto the table and slid it across the polished wood until it rested perfectly in front of her plate. "My checkbook is closed, Kelsey," I replied, keeping my voice entirely flat and devoid of emotion. "I fund the property taxes. I keep the lights on. I pay the maintenance fees. I do not finance your tropical photo shoots." Kelsey dropped her phone. It clattered loudly against the table. Her lips parted in genuine, unadulterated shock. She was so thoroughly conditioned to my silent financial compliance that a simple, definitive refusal completely short-circuited her brain. Sylvia intervened immediately. She slammed her wine glass down onto the table. The red liquid sloshed violently over the rim, staining the pristine white tablecloth. "Mary, you are being impossible," Sylvia hissed, her eyes narrowing into vicious slits. "Trent is going to be family. He is on the verge of taking his company public. He is bringing actual prestige to this family. Kelsey deserves a proper celebration, and you are trying to humiliate her over a few dollars." "I am not humiliating anyone," I countered, holding my mother's furious gaze. "I am establishing a boundary. I have subsidized this illusion for 12 years. I will not fund a vacation for a man who hides from unknown callers on my patio." Sylvia stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. She needed Trent's illusion of wealth to validate her own desperate social climbing. By denying the money, I threatened to expose the fragile foundation of their entire charade. "You are a bitter, jealous woman," Sylvia spat, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "You cannot stand to see your sister secure a successful man because you spend your entire life staring at computer screens. You will pay for this trip. Marry, or I will ensure you regret it." I stood up slowly. I did not raise my voice. I did not match her hysterical energy. "The boundary stands," I said. I turned my back on them and walked out of the dining room, leaving the glossy brochure resting in the spilled wine. That single boundary severed Sylvia's control over me. She realized she could no longer manipulate my sense of duty to extract capital. Instead of accepting the reality of her financial situation, she chose retaliation. Over the next 4 weeks, Sylvia accelerated the wedding timeline with frantic, manic energy. She planned the lavish engagement gala for this exact weekend in October 2026. She deliberately omitted my name from the guest list. She coordinated with Kelsey and Trent, feeding their resentment, convincing them that I was a hostile threat to their aristocratic aesthetic. Sylvia believed she could execute a campaign of total isolation. She believed that by freezing me out of the family, by treating me like a pariah, the psychological pressure would eventually break my resolve. She expected me to cave, to write a massive check just to buy my way back into her good graces. When silence failed to break me, she escalated to physical barriers. She hired a locksmith. She reset the digital keypad on the wrought-iron gates. She sent the lockout text, proudly declaring me dead to them. She thought changing a few locks cemented her ultimate victory. She failed to realize that pushing a cybersecurity architect out into the cold only gives her a clear, unobstructed view of the network vulnerabilities. They demanded a war. And as I took my first sip of the bitter coffee, I prepared to deliver one. With my laptop open and my black espresso sitting beside me in the quiet corner booth, I prepared to execute the breach. Sylvia believed she could lock me out of the property by changing a physical gate code and swapping a deadbolt. She failed to comprehend that physical locks are entirely useless when you control the digital foundation of the environment. During the initial renovation 12 years ago, I hardwired the entire property, installing environmental sensors, biometric locks, and high-definition surveillance cameras hidden in the crown molding of every primary room. More importantly, I established a ghost node and encrypted, invisible backdoor completely detached from the primary user interface. Sylvia did not know it existed. She could not delete my administrative privileges because the system did not register my presence. I brought up a terminal window on my screen. I typed a sequence of override commands. The code cascaded down the black background in a rapid, fluid stream. My software bypassed the newly established firewall in 3 seconds. The estate's local network surrendered its credentials. I opened the surveillance dashboard. I clicked the feed labeled Formal Living Room. The high-definition image materialized on my screen, accompanied by crisp, synced audio. The room looked immaculate, staged perfectly for the upcoming engagement gala. Logs crackled in the marble fireplace. Sylvia stood near the velvet sofa, holding a bottle of expensive champagne. The cork popped, a sharp crack echoing through the laptop speakers. She filled 3 crystal flutes, the golden liquid bubbling over the rims. Kelsey sat in the center of the sofa, holding her left hand up to the light, twisting her engagement ring. She accepted a glass from Sylvia, entirely unfazed by the hostile eviction of her sister just hours prior. Trent did not take his glass. He stood near the mahogany credenza, his back turned to the women. He stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the rain pummel the patio, the confident, arrogant tech founder persona, completely evaporated. He gripped the edge of the credenza, his knuckles stark white. He breathed in shallow, ragged gasps. "Trent, darling," Sylvia purred, stepping toward him with the champagne. "Drink, we are celebrating. The locks are changed, the gate is secured, Mary is out, and the gala is tomorrow. We have absolute control." Trent whipped around. He slapped the champagne glass out of her hand. The crystal shattered against the hardwood floor. The liquid splashed across the hem of Sylvia's trousers. Kelsey gasped, pulling her feet up onto the sofa. Sylvia froze, her triumphant grin instantly vanishing, replaced by genuine shock. "I do not care about the locks," Trent shouted, his voice cracking, entirely stripped of its usual smooth baritone. He grabbed fistfuls of his own hair, pacing violently across the Persian rug. "I do not care about your petty family feud. Sylvia, I'm out of time." He spun to face them, his chest heaving. "The venture capital firm called an hour ago. The underwriters flagged my startup's revenue projections. They halted the bridge loan." Sylvia stared at him, the shattered glass crunching under her shoes as she took a cautious step forward. "What bridge loan? Trent, you told us the company was preparing to go public. You said you were flush with capital." "I lied," Trent barked, pointing a shaking finger at the ceiling. "I burned through the seed money 6 months ago. I owe vendors. I owe independent contractors. I owe individuals who do not send polite collection letters. If I do not secure a $5 million capital injection by Monday morning, the entire operation collapses. I lose the company. I face bankruptcy and possibly federal wire fraud charges for the fabricated quarterly reports I submitted to the early investors." The silence in the living room turned absolute. Kelsey dropped her hand, the engagement ring suddenly looking heavy and toxic. She stared at Trent, her mouth slightly open, the illusion of her aristocratic future shattering in real time. Trent dropped onto the leather armchair, burying his face in his hands. "The firm offered a lifeline," he muttered through his fingers. "They will release the $5 million by 8 o'clock in the morning on Monday, but they require hard, physical collateral. They need a tangible asset to back the capital. My leased cars and rented office space will not cover it. I need real estate, unencumbered real estate." He looked up, his bloodshot eyes locking onto Sylvia. "I need this house, Sylvia. I need to put this estate up as collateral, or the wedding is off, and I am ruined." I sat in the coffee shop, gripping the edge of my table. I pressed my headphones tighter against my ears. The sheer audacity of his demand hung in the digital feed. He wanted to use my property, the property I secretly paid for over 12 years, to bail out his fraudulent tech startup. I watched Sylvia's face. A rational mother would throw him out. A rational property owner would dial the police. But Sylvia was not rational. She was a narcissist terrified of losing her social standing if Trent went bankrupt. The engagement gala scheduled for Saturday night would become a public humiliation. Her country club peers would laugh at her. She would lose the wealthy son-in-law she desperately needed to validate her existence. Sylvia did not hesitate. She turned on her heel and marched across the living room to the antique mahogany desk tucked in the corner. She pulled open the bottom drawer, her hands frantically digging through a stack of manila folders. She yanked one out, slapped it onto the coffee table, and flipped it open. "I anticipated a hurdle," Sylvia announced, her voice regaining its arrogant, commanding edge. "I prepared a contingency." Trent leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. He stared at the thick, premium paper resting on the glass table. "What is that?" Sylvia traced the text with her manicured fingernail. "It is a quitclaim deed. I found a blank. Notarized template in Mary's old files years ago. She was always careless with her paperwork." That was a lie. I never left blank templates. She breached my locked filing cabinet. "I filled in the property details this morning," Sylvia continued, her eyes gleaming with a manic, toxic pride. I legally transferred the ownership of this entire estate from the Ironwood Trust directly into the names of Kelsey and Trent. I signed Mary's name on the grantor line. I dated it retroactively. Trent stared at the document. He picked it up, his hands trembling as he read the forged signature. Sylvia, this is a forgery. The notary stamp is completely unverified. If the bank scrutinizes this, they will not scrutinize it, Sylvia snapped, leaning over the table, pressing her hands flat against the glass. It is Friday afternoon. The venture capital underwriters are rushing to close the books before the weekend. You upload that deed to their secure portal right now. You tell them your future mother-in-law gifted the estate as an early wedding present. By the time anyone files a discrepancy, the $5 million will already sit in your corporate account on Monday morning. Trent looked at Kelsey. Kelsey did not object. She did not express horror at her mother stealing her sister's house. She simply picked up her champagne flute and took a sip. "Do it, Trent," Kelsey instructed, her voice cold and entitled. "We need that money to pay the caterers for tomorrow night." Trent looked back at the forged quitclaim deed, his moral compass, entirely non-existent to begin with, completely shattered under the pressure of his impending bankruptcy. He pulled out his phone, snapped high-resolution photos of the front and back of the document, and opened his email client. "I am uploading the collateral files to the underwriter's portal," Trent muttered, his thumbs flying across the screen. "They will process the deed and authorize the wire transfer for Monday morning." I sat in the corner booth of the coffee shop, the cold espresso entirely forgotten. The audio feed crackled softly in my headphones. Sylvia did not just lock me out of my house. She committed federal forgery. She crossed state lines digitally to defraud a venture capital firm. Trent became an active co-conspirator in federal bank fraud. Kelsey acted as a willing accessory. They believed they executed the perfect crime. They believed they stole a multi-million-dollar asset from a helpless, oblivious victim. I closed the video feed. I minimized the window. I did not feel panic. I did not feel the crushing weight of betrayal. The silent endurance of my 20s vanished completely, replaced by an absolute glacial clarity. A forged quitclaim, deed submitted to a federal lending institution, triggers an immediate, devastating chain reaction if the true owner disputes the claim with hard, time-stamped evidence. Sylvia thought she was building a future for her golden child. Instead, she just handed me the exact rope required to hang all three of them on a federal scaffold. I opened a new, heavily encrypted workspace on my laptop screen. The time for observation concluded. The audit officially began. The coffee shop hummed with the low, steady murmur of afternoon patrons and the hiss of the espresso machine, but the ambient noise faded entirely from my awareness. The glowing screen of my laptop anchored me. The digital feed from the estate's living room was closed, yet the echo of Sylvia's confession reverberated in my mind. She forged a quitclaim deed. She submitted it to a venture capital firm. She weaponized my 12 years of silent financial support to secure a $5 million bridge loan for a man drowning in debt. The tension compressed in my chest, a coiled spring winding tighter with every passing second. This was no longer a petty domestic dispute over a guest list or a catering bill. Sylvia crossed state lines digitally to defraud a federal lending institution. She committed wire fraud, bank fraud, and aggravated identity theft in a single, arrogant afternoon. My forensic instincts seized absolute control. Before I could dismantle Trent's fabricated tech empire, I needed to verify the existence of the weapon Sylvia claimed to hold. I opened a secure, heavily encrypted browser session. I navigated to the county clerk's public property registry portal, bypassing the standard consumer search index. I utilized a specialized query script to scrape the pending digital transaction queue. The progress bar crawled across the screen, parsing through thousands of real estate filings submitted before the weekend cutoff. The system returned a match. A high-definition scanned PDF materialized on my monitor. The header bore the official seal of the county. The title read, "Quitclaim Deed." I scrolled down to the grantor section. The document legally stripped the Ironwood Trust of all ownership rights to the sprawling estate, transferring the title entirely to Kelsey and Trent. I zoomed in on the signature line. My name sat there, written in Sylvia's hurried, loopy script. She barely attempted to mimic my actual signature. Below it rested a digital notary stamp, a cheap, easily acquired graphic slapped onto the page to bypass the preliminary automated review. My smartphone rested on the wooden table right next to my lukewarm espresso. The screen reflected the harsh overhead lights. I stared at the device. I could dial 911. I could report the immediate theft of my property to the local authorities. I ran the simulation of that scenario in my head. The local sheriff dispatches a patrol car to the estate. Sylvia cries, clutching a lace handkerchief, claiming it is a massive misunderstanding between an estranged mother and a mentally unstable daughter. Trent hires a ruthless defense attorney. The issue bogs down in civil litigation for years, draining my resources while they continue to live in my house. I reached out and flipped the smartphone face down against the wood. Local police handle burglaries and noise complaints. I handle absolute, systemic destruction. I pushed the forged deed into a secure digital vault on my hard drive. I needed to examine the catalyst of this entire crime. A man does not scream at unknown callers in the rain and demand $5 million on a Friday afternoon unless a massive, inescapable deadline hangs directly over his head. Trent projected the aura of a Silicon Valley titan, but the math refused to align. I launched a virtual machine, masking my internet protocol address through a cascading series of international proxies. I became a ghost in the network. I queried the Delaware Division of Corporations, Trent's primary venture, an enterprise cloud storage optimization platform, listed a registered agent in Wilmington. I extracted the articles of incorporation. I scraped the Securities and Exchange Commission databases, hunting for his Form D filings to analyze his public funding rounds. The venture capital firm he pitched released a press statement exactly 18 months ago, announcing a $3 million seed round to propel Trent's revolutionary data architecture. I cracked my knuckles, the joints popping sharply in the quiet corner booth. $3 million burns rapidly in the tech sector, but it always leaves a massive, undeniable thermal signature. A company claiming to revolutionize cloud storage requires staggering overhead server farms, massive bandwidth contracts, proprietary encryption keys, and a small army of developers. I initiated a packet sniffing protocol, directing my software to analyze the web traffic hitting Trent's primary corporate domain. I pulled the digital telemetry, tracing the inbound and outbound data routing through his claimed infrastructure. The results cascaded across my terminal in bright green text. The predator caught the scent of blood. The numbers simply did not exist. Trent's corporate website hosted a slick landing page filled with buzzwords, stock photos of smiling executives, and a few inactive client login portals. I ran a reverse lookup on the specific internet protocol addresses he claimed to lease for his massive data centers. The bandwidth usage registered as a flatline. He possessed no enterprise-level data processing capabilities. His servers routed the data equivalent of a small, local bakery. Yet, according to the preliminary prospectus he submitted to his investors, Trent reported staggering monthly expenditures for Amazon Web Services and proprietary data center hosting. He categorized hundreds of thousands of dollars a month as critical infrastructure costs. I leaned closer to the monitor, the cold blue light reflecting in my eyes. The discrepancy formed a gaping, bleeding wound in his balance sheet. He claimed massive cloud infrastructure expenditures, but the actual data packets and traffic routing showed a digital ghost town. I mapped the flow of the initial $3 million seed capital. Trent routed the funds from the primary corporate account into a secondary holding account, labeling the transfers as server acquisition and maintenance. He generated fabricated expense reports for cloud infrastructure, presenting them to his board and his investors to justify the burn rate. But the infrastructure did not exist. The servers were phantoms. The realization washed over me, cold and absolute. Trent siphoned the seed money. He bled the $3 million dry, hiding the theft behind the impenetrable jargon of tech development. Now, 18 months later, the early investors expected a return. They demanded to see the revolutionary product. They demanded audits. The walls closed in on him, forcing him to scramble for a $5 million bridge loan to cover the massive deficit before his original backers discovered the gaping hole in the ledger. He was not a visionary. He was a parasite operating a Ponzi scheme dressed in a tailored suit. I sat back against the leather booth. I closed my eyes, aligning the disparate pieces of data into a lethal, cohesive weapon. Sylvia thought she secured a titan of industry to elevate her social standing. She actually tethered her golden child to a sinking anchor in her desperation to fund Kelsey's unearned aristocracy. Sylvia legally tied herself to a man committing massive corporate fraud. I opened a new text document, titling it The Master Dossier. I began dragging the packet-sniffing logs, the bandwidth telemetry, and the SEC filings into the folder. I categorized the evidence with the clinical, merciless precision of an autopsy. I am not the quiet, compliant sister banished to the shadows of the family estate. I am the architect of the systems they blindly exploit. I command the data, and the data never lies. I picked up my espresso cup. The coffee was entirely cold, the bitter taste mirroring the absolute resolve hardening in my chest. Trent operated under the delusion that he could outsmart the financial sector. Sylvia operated under the delusion that she could steal my home without consequence. They demanded a war of intelligence, wholly unaware they just provoked an apex predator hunting in her natural domain. The audit was far from over. The $3 million vanished into the dark, and I fully intended to follow the money straight into the abyss. The city hummed outside my high-rise apartment window. Midnight approached on Friday. I bypassed my espresso machine and poured a glass of ice water. The sharp cold focused my mind, stripping away the lingering exhaustion of the week. I sat at my glass desk, the monitor casting a pale blue glow across my face. The time for observation had ended. I prepared to execute a hostile digital breach. Earlier in the day, when Trent hastily uploaded the forged quitclaim deed to his venture capital portal, he connected his smartphone to the estate's local network. I own that network. I siphoned the packet data continuously. Trent failed to establish a virtual private network. He relied on standard, unencrypted protocols, treating cybersecurity with the exact same careless arrogance he applied to his finances. I parsed the captured router logs, sifting through the raw data traffic. I isolated a specific string of alphanumeric characters from the cache, an active session token bridging his device to a cloud-hosted accounting server. I hijacked the token, bypassing the authentication screen entirely. The server dashboard materialized on my monitor. I navigated to the accounts payable directory. I extracted a master spreadsheet detailing outbound wire transfers. The $3 million seed capital did not simply evaporate into the digital ether. It moved. I located the routing numbers attached to the fabricated infrastructure expenses he presented to his investors. I fed the sequences into a proprietary scraping tool I engineered for corporate audits. The software burrowed directly into the Delaware Division of Corporations database, pulling the registered ownership records. 3 distinct entities emerged on the screen: Apex Cloud Holdings, Vertex Data Logistics, and Zenith Processing. I cross-referenced their registration data. Trent filed the paperwork for all 3 limited liability companies on the exact same Thursday afternoon, utilizing the exact same registered agent operating out of an anonymous strip mall in Wilmington. The corporate veils were remarkably thin, constructed with the sloppy haste of a man who believed nobody possessed the intellect to verify his claims. I mapped the financial arteries. I launched a data visualization program designed to track cartel money laundering across international borders. The screen turned pitch black. Nodes of glowing white light appeared, representing the domestic bank accounts holding the initial $3 million. I input the Delaware routing numbers. I initiated the trace. The white light shot across the screen, depicting the flow of the capital. The funds hit the Delaware shell companies and immediately shattered. Trent deployed a classic smurfing technique, breaking the massive sum into thousands of microscopic transactions designed to avoid federal reporting thresholds. The scattered funds bounced rapidly through secondary clearinghouses, crossing digital borders. The nodes multiplied, spreading across the global map like a localized infection. But money laundering requires a collection point. The scattered light must eventually reconverge. I adjusted the algorithm, forcing it to hunt for the terminal destination. The software churned, processing the encrypted routing protocols. Slowly, the scattered white lines pulled together. concentrating heavily on two specific geographical locations, a private banking sector in the Cayman Islands and a holding trust in Macau. The funds did not purchase enterprise servers or cloud architecture. They fed an offshore entity. I highlighted the terminal account hashes. I accessed a highly classified threat intelligence database utilized by my cybersecurity firm to monitor global financial terrorism. I ran the offshore hashes against the blacklisted registry, a glaring crimson banner slashed across my monitor. The database returned a direct, undeniable match. The offshore holding accounts did not belong to a legitimate technology vendor. They belonged to a shadow syndicate operating a massive, unregulated international sports gambling network. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, the pieces locked together with an audible, conceptual click. Trent did not launch a tech startup to revolutionize cloud storage. He launched a digital washing machine. The venture capital seed money provided the legitimate, pristine front. The gambling syndicate funneled dirty capital into the Delaware shell companies, disguising it as inbound client revenue for server hosting. Trent's job involved mixing the dirty money with the legitimate venture capital, washing it clean, and wiring it offshore to Macau and the Cayman Islands as fabricated infrastructure expenses. But a parasite cannot resist feeding on its host. I pulled the inbound and outbound ledgers, stacking the data side by side on dual monitors. I calculated the total volume of illicit capital deposited by the syndicate against the total volume wired offshore. The columns did not balance. A gaping, jagged deficit bled across the spreadsheet. Trent skimmed the cash. He siphoned funds directly from the syndicate's deposits to finance his leased sports car, his oversized platinum watches, and the extravagant lifestyle required to impress Sylvia and secure Kelsey. He stole millions from an international gambling syndicate operating entirely beyond the reach of the law. I stared at the crimson deficit on my screen. This revelation changed the entire taxonomy of his panic. When Trent paced the patio, screaming into his phone in the pouring rain, he did not argue with an impatient venture capitalist. He argued with a syndicate enforcer. The offshore operators audited his digital washing machine. They discovered the missing capital. They issued an ultimatum. The $5 million bridge loan Trent desperately requested from the legitimate venture capital firm served a singular, terrifying purpose. He did not plan to invest it in his company. He intended to wire the entire sum offshore by Monday morning to replace the money he stole. It functioned as a ransom payment. If that $5 million did not hit the Macau holding account, Trent would not face Securities and Exchange Commission fines or corporate bankruptcy. He would face physical, brutal retaliation from men who do not file civil lawsuits. The forged quitclaim deed currently sitting on the venture capital firm's server acted as the collateral for this survival loan. Sylvia thought she sacrificed my house to secure her daughter's elite social status. She actually threw my estate into a meat grinder to pay off a gambling syndicate's blood debt. I tapped my fingers against the glass surface of my desk. The rhythm matched the ticking countdown echoing in my head. They handed a loaded gun to a woman who specializes in dismantling explosive devices. Sylvia and Kelsey coasted through life, utterly insulated from consequences, believing their toxic entitlement offered them absolute protection. They tied themselves to a desperate criminal, willingly forging federal documents to aid his escape. I closed the offshore tracking software and locked the raw data cache. I initiated an encrypted backup, sealing the evidence in a digital vault that no defense attorney could ever penetrate. The audit yielded absolute, lethal perfection. The trap possessed zero structural flaws. I powered down the monitors, plunging the room into darkness. The glow of the city lights filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the floor. I did not intend to stop them. I fully intended to let them walk straight onto the gallows, finalizing the wire transfer on federal servers, cementing their own inescapable destruction. Saturday morning broke over the city, casting sharp, angular beams of sunlight across my apartment floor. I bypassed the kitchen entirely and walked straight into the cold spray of the shower, letting the freezing water shock my system, washing away the lingering fatigue of the midnight breach. I stepped out, dried off, and pulled on a dark cashmere sweater. I brewed a pot of black coffee, poured a ceramic mug, and carried it into my home office. The digital clock on my desk glowed, reading exactly 7 o'clock in the morning. Less than 24 hours remained before the engagement gala. Less than 48 hours remained before the venture capital firm authorized the $5 million wire transfer. I booted up my primary workstation. The monitors hummed to life, displaying the raw, chaotic data extracted from the estate's network and Trent's unencrypted cloud servers. I needed to synthesize the chaos into a lethal, undeniable narrative. I created a master directory, titling it Operation Ironwood. I began compiling the evidence, building a color-coded, heavily encrypted digital dossier. I work with data for a living. I know that federal prosecutors and Federal Bureau of Investigation agents appreciate pristine, irrefutable organization. I established a crimson tab for Trent. Inside, I dropped the packet-sniffing logs, the fabricated enterprise server receipts, and the inbound tracking telemetry from his Delaware limited liability companies. I appended the offshore routing hashes, tracing the stolen capital directly to the Cayman Islands and the Macau gambling syndicate. I attached the threat intelligence readouts, explicitly linking his destination accounts to known international money laundering operations. The Crimson tab represented a massive, airtight federal racketeering case. Next, I created a Sapphire tab for Sylvia. I uploaded the high-definition scans of the forged quitclaim deed. I extracted the metadata from the document, pinpointing the exact timestamp Sylvia created the file on her personal computer. I pulled the Internet Protocol logs from the estate's router, proving conclusively that Trent uploaded the forged document from the formal living room. I attached the audio recording I captured through the hidden surveillance camera, capturing Sylvia explicitly bragging about signing my name and backdating the legal transfer. Finally, I established an Emerald tab for Kelsey. She did not physically sign the forgery, nor did she upload it to the venture capital portal. But the law operates on mechanics, not mere physical execution. By accepting the estate as a gift to collateralize her fiancé's loan, Kelsey became the named beneficiary of a stolen asset by sitting on that velvet sofa, sipping champagne, and instructing Trent to upload the deed to secure her catering funds. She crossed the legal threshold. I locked the master directory. I applied a military-grade encryption protocol, sealing the dossier behind a 256-bit cryptographic key. The digital guillotine was fully assembled, sharpened, and waiting for the drop. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, taking a slow sip of my black coffee. The bitter liquid grounded me as I ran the legal calculus through my mind. The mechanics of their crime were breathtakingly arrogant. If Sylvia simply forged my name on a piece of paper and left it in her desk drawer, she committed state-level forgery. A local prosecutor might offer her probation. But Sylvia and Trent escalated the crime exponentially. They uploaded that forged deed to a venture capital firm's secure portal. They transmitted fraudulent collateral across state lines using an internet connection to secure a $5 million commercial loan. That specific action triggered a cascade of federal statutes. They committed wire fraud. They committed bank fraud. They engaged in a conspiracy to defraud a lending institution. Sylvia and Kelsey were no longer merely entitled social climbers. They were active, documented co-conspirators in a federal financial crime carrying mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines. The coil in my chest wound tighter. My thumb hovered over the trackpad. I possessed the evidence required to destroy them right now. I could dial the local sheriff. I could email the dossier to the venture capital underwriters this very second, freezing the bridge loan before the weekend concluded. I pulled my hand away from the desk. If I stopped them on Saturday morning, I provided them an escape hatch. If the police arrived at the estate today, Sylvia would weep. She would claim she filled out the deed as a draft. A simple administrative mistake. Trent would hire an expensive corporate defense attorney. He would argue that he uploaded the wrong file to the portal in a rush, a clerical error committed under the intense pressure of a startup deadline. Kelsey would play the naive, oblivious bride, completely insulated from the fallout. They would spin a narrative of a misunderstanding. They would manipulate the local authorities, framing me as a vindictive, estranged sister attempting to ruin a joyous family milestone out of pure spite. They might face minor civil penalties, but they would evade the penitentiary. They would survive. and they would continue to feed on my stability. I refused to leave them an exit. To guarantee absolute, inescapable destruction, the crime required finality. The digital ink needed to dry on the federal servers. The venture capital firm needed to process the collateral and authorize the release of the funds. The $5 million had to hit Trent's corporate account on Monday morning. The moment that capital cleared the wire, the fraud became absolute. A completed wire transfer based on forged collateral eliminates the clerical error defense. It cements the intent. It guarantees the federal minimum sentences. I must let them finalize the loan. I must let them walk freely into the execution chamber, entirely convinced they outsmarted the executioner. I turned my attention to the digital clock. 10 o'clock in the morning. The engagement gala commenced at 7 o'clock this evening. Sylvia planned to host the local elite, the country club board members, and Trent's fabricated network of tech investors on the manicured lawns of my property. She intended to parade Kelsey around under the white canvas tents, reveling in the aristocratic illusion she financed with a stolen deed. She sent that lockout text yesterday to ensure I remained banished in the shadows, completely unaware of her triumph. I stood up from my desk. I walked out of the home office and down the hallway to my bedroom closet. I pushed past the casual sweaters and denim, reaching for the heavy wooden hangers in the back. I pulled out a sharp, tailored black suit. The fabric felt cool and structured against my fingers. I selected a crisp, charcoal silk blouse to wear beneath it. I laid the garments meticulously across the foot of my bed, smoothing the lapels. I decided right then I would not sit in my apartment, monitoring their network traffic from a safe, invisible distance. I refused to let them celebrate their theft unchallenged. I needed to cross the perimeter. I needed to stand in the center of the estate I purchased, surrounded by the catering staff I subsidized, and look them directly in the eye. I wanted to witness their arrogant victory firsthand. I wanted to watch Sylvia hold court. I wanted to observe Trent projecting the false confidence of a Silicon Valley titan. I needed to see Kelsey twist that engagement ring under the party lights, entirely ignorant of the federal indictment bearing down on her. I would attend the gala. I would endure whatever public humiliation Sylvia attempted to inflict. I would let her scream, mock, and declare her dominance in front of her high society peers. I would weaponize my silence, absorbing their hubris, knowing that every single breath they took on that property was closely monitored by a digital surveillance system they could not comprehend. I walked into the master bathroom and splashed freezing water onto my face. I stared at my reflection in the vanity mirror. The woman looking back at me was not a victim mourning the loss of a family. She was a forensic architect preparing to detonate a controlled demolition. I dried my face, returned to the bedroom, and picked up the black suit jacket. They demanded a war of intellect. And tonight, I intended to walk directly into the lion's den. The dashboard digital display shifted to exactly 7 o'clock in the evening. The relentless afternoon downpour had finally fractured, leaving the October air sharp and biting. I steered my vehicle off the main highway, the tires crunching over the gravel shoulder as I approached the perimeter of the estate. I killed the headlights, 50 yards ahead. The massive wrought-iron gates blocked the entrance. A brand new numeric keypad gleamed under the amber security light, Sylvia's physical declaration of my banishment. I shifted the car into park. I did not dig for a key fob. I did not punch a code. I picked up my smartphone from the center console. I launched the backdoor script I compiled over my morning coffee. My thumb tapped the execute command. The encrypted signal bypassed the local firewall in a fraction of a second. The heavy iron gates shuddered. The mechanical gears ground against each other, emitting a heavy, scraping groan of metal surrendering to code. The massive iron wings swung inward, parting the barrier completely. Sylvia paid a premium to lock me out. I breached her fortress with a single keystroke. I flipped the headlights back on, illuminating the wet asphalt, and pressed the accelerator. The winding driveway curved through the ancient oaks. As I cleared the tree line, the full scale of Sylvia's fabricated aristocracy dominated the landscape. Brilliant white canvas tents spanned the manicured back lawn. Strings of amber bistro lights crisscrossed the sky, casting a warm, golden glow over the gathering. A string quartet occupied a raised wooden platform. The the haunting notes of a cello drifting over the hum of 100 overlapping conversations. Valets in crisp white shirts rushed back and forth, parking a parade of luxury vehicles. I ignored the valet queue. I bypassed the designated guest parking and steered my sedan directly onto the circular cobblestone driveway, stopping the tires mere inches from the grand marble staircase. I cut the engine. I stepped out into the freezing autumn air. I wore the tailored black suit. The structured shoulders and razor-sharp lapels acted as armor. I secured the single button at my waist. I did not carry a purse. I did not check my reflection. I marched up the marble steps, the sharp click of my heels keeping a lethal, rhythmic tempo. I bypassed the foyer and walked straight through the open French doors onto the sprawling terrace. The scale of the financial hemorrhage struck me instantly. Waiters circulated holding silver trays stacked with beluga caviar and seared scallops. A massive 10-tier champagne tower anchored the center of the main tent. The local elite country club board members, local politicians, and Sylvia's sycophants mingled in expensive silk gowns and bespoke tuxedos. They drank the champagne I subsidized. They stood on the stone pavers I maintained. I stepped off the terrace and onto the grass, crossing the threshold of the main tent. I did not announce myself. I simply walked into the center of the crowd. The shift did not happen instantly, it rippled. The guests nearest the entrance noticed the stark contrast of my severe black suit against the sea of pastel silks and glittering jewels. Their conversations died mid-sentence. The silence spread like a contagion, passing from table to table, group to group. The clinking of crystal paused. The laughter choked. The cellist missed a beat, the bow sliding harshly against the strings. The violinist stopped entirely. The music died in a discordant, confused screech before the musicians lowered their instruments completely. Within 30 seconds, an absolute suffocating vacuum consumed the gala. Over 100 pairs of eyes locked onto me. The crowd instinctively parted, stepping backward, creating a wide, empty aisle leading directly to the center of the tent. At the far end of that aisle stood the architects of this treason. Kelsey spotted me first. She stood near the champagne tower, draped in a custom ivory gown, laughing at a joke made by a visiting local judge. The laughter died in her throat. Her jaw went slack. The blood drained out of her face, leaving her complexion a sickly, translucent gray. Her fingers lost their grip. The crystal flute slipped from her hand, plummeting toward the earth. The glass shattered against a slate stepping stone, exploding into 1,000 glittering shards. The sharp crack echoed through the silent tent like a gunshot. Trent stood exactly 3 feet to her left. He wore a midnight blue velvet dinner jacket. He held a tumbler of bourbon. Leaning in to charm a cluster of commercial real estate developers he likely targeted as his next venture capital marks. He heard the glass shatter. He turned his head, his face carrying the arrogant, polished smile of a Silicon Valley disruptor. His eyes met mine. The smile cracked. The muscles in his cheeks twitched. He blinked rapidly, his posture instantly stiffening. The relaxed, confident Titan vanished, replaced immediately by the hunted, frantic animal I watched on the surveillance feed 24 hours prior. His knuckles turned stark white around his bourbon glass. He recognized the threat, even if he did not yet understand the mechanics of the trap. He took a subtle half-step backward, putting physical distance between himself and the aisle. Then, the crowd shifted near the bar. Sylvia broke through a cluster of country club wives. She wore a heavy emerald green dress, a string of pearls resting tight around her neck. She held a silver cake knife, preparing to slice the multi-tiered engagement cake. She turned, sensing the unnatural silence gripping her audience. She saw me standing in the center of the aisle. The veneer of the gracious matriarch melted off her face like wax. The veins in her neck bulged against the pearls. Her eyes widened, flashing with a raw, unadulterated fury. She gripped the silver knife so hard the metal pressed deeply into her palm. She did not freeze like Kelsey or cower like Trent. She attacked. Sylvia threw the cake knife onto a linen-draped table. She marched toward me, her heels sinking into the soft turf with every aggressive, heavy stride. She closed the distance in seconds, invading my personal space, stopping mere inches from my chest. She radiated the distinct scent of gin and panicked rage. "What are you doing here?" Sylvia hissed. She kept her voice low, a desperate, raspy whisper designed to keep the surrounding guests from hearing the venom. She wanted to maintain the illusion, but her entire frame vibrated with fury. "You are not on the guest list. You are banned from this property." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked down into her wide, furious eyes. "I decided I wanted a glass of champagne," I replied, my voice steady, carrying a cold, deadpan authority. "How did you get through the gate?" Sylvia demanded, her chest heaving, spittle flying from her lips. "I paid $2,000 to a security contractor yesterday. I reset the digital lock. I changed the deadbolts. How did you breach the perimeter?" She stared at me, expecting an answer, expecting me to shrink under her aggressive posture. She expected the compliant, dutiful daughter she commanded for 12 years to bow her head and apologize. I offered her nothing but an icy, unblinking stare. I let the silence stretch, forcing her to stew in the terrifying realization that her physical barriers meant absolutely nothing to me. I commanded the digital space, and by extension, I commanded the ground beneath her feet. "Security is a concept you fundamentally misunderstand, Sylvia," I stated, my tone devoid of any familial warmth. "A lock only keeps out the people who do not know how to dismantle the door." The guests surrounding us leaned in, their eyes wide, hungrily absorbing the fractured dynamic of the family they idolized. Sylvia noticed the audience. She realized her quiet intimidation tactic had failed. Her breathing grew shallow. She realized that whispers would not remove me from the center of her gala. To preserve her territory, she decided to escalate. She decided to burn me to the ground in front of her peers, wholly unaware she was lighting a match inside a powder keg. Sylvia stepped backward, her heels grinding into the turf. She abandoned the hushed, frantic whispering, if she could not intimidate me in the shadows. She resolved to annihilate me in the spotlight. She smoothed the front of her heavy emerald green dress, pulling her shoulders back to project the posture of a burdened, long-suffering matriarch. She turned away from me, pivoting to face the sea of country club peers, local politicians, and fabricated tech investors who stood paralyzed in the center of the main tent. "I apologize to all of you for this disruption," Sylvia projected, her voice carrying a practiced, theatrical tremble. She placed a hand over her pearl necklace, anchoring her performance. "I hope to keep this a private family matter, but my oldest daughter refuses to respect boundaries. She refuses to respect the joyous occasion we gathered to celebrate tonight." The crowd leaned in, their eyes darting between my tailored black suit and Sylvia's glittering gown. They hungered for the spectacle. Sylvia pointed a trembling, manicured finger in my direction. "Mary lacks the capacity to celebrate anyone but herself. She spends her entire existence locked in a dark room, staring at computer screens, working 80-hour weeks while completely abandoning her family. She is a bitter, isolated spinster. She possesses no husband, no social grace, and absolutely no understanding of family loyalty." I did not cross my arms. I did not shift my weight. I remained perfectly rooted to the grass, letting her words echo against the canvas ceiling. "She is profoundly jealous of her younger sister," Sylvia continued, her volume rising, feeding off the silent, rapt attention of her audience. She gestured toward the champagne tower, where Kelsey stood clutching Trent's arm. "Kelsey secured a brilliant, successful man. Kelsey possesses a bright, beautiful future. Mary cannot tolerate that reality. She crashed this gala tonight to sabotage her own sister out of pure, unadulterated spite. She is unstable, paranoid, and completely unwelcome on this property." A low murmur rippled through the gathered elite. A few women in pastel silk gowns shook their heads, casting pitying glances at Sylvia while glaring at me with undisguised contempt. Sylvia successfully weaponized my career and my independence, painting my solitary focus as a symptom of a fractured mind. She played the victim flawlessly. But character assassination merely served as the appetizer. Sylvia intended to deliver the main course. She wanted to erect an insurmountable wall between my existence and their fabricated aristocracy. She turned her back to the crowd and faced Trent and Kelsey. She extended her arms, adopting the pose of a benevolent monarch bestowing a royal decree. I plan to save this announcement for the champagne toast, Sylvia declared, ensuring her voice reached the back rows of the tent. But given the hostile intrusion, I believe we must clarify the boundaries of this estate immediately. Trent stiffened. His hand gripped his bourbon glass, the liquid sloshing slightly against the rim. He knew exactly what she planned to say, and he knew the underlying, fraudulent mechanics of the transaction. Yesterday afternoon, I executed a formal quitclaim deed, Sylvia announced, her chin lifting with toxic pride. I legally transferred the absolute ownership of this entire property as an early wedding present and to provide a foundational headquarters for Trent's expanding technology empire. I gifted this estate entirely to Trent and Kelsey. The crowd erupted. The silence shattered into a chorus of enthusiastic gasps, scattered applause, and murmured congratulations. The country club board members raised their crystal flutes, toasting Sylvia's astonishing generosity. Giving away a sprawling, multi-million-dollar estate solidified her status as the ultimate apex socialite. Kelsey beamed. The translucent gray shock vanished from her complexion, replaced by a flush of absolute, arrogant triumph. She released Trent's arm, stepping forward to accept the applause. She believed the lie. She believed the paper her mother signed somehow magically erased my 12 years of financial dominion. She looked at me, a cruel, mocking smirk twisting her lips, entirely convinced she had just witnessed my permanent exile. Trent forced a smile. He raised his bourbon glass to the crowd, acknowledging the applause. But the gesture lacked his usual aggressive swagger. His eyes darted nervously between Sylvia's triumphant face and my utterly passive expression. He possessed enough predatory instinct to recognize that cornered animals usually fight back. My complete lack of physical reaction unsettled his internal calculus. Sylvia turned back to face me, basking in the glow of the crowd's approval. She stepped forward, closing the distance, her chest puffed out with victory. "You hold no power here, Mary," Sylvia whispered, dropping her volume so only I could hear the venom. "You do not own the ground you stand on. The paperwork is filed. The transaction is complete. You are officially trespassing on your sister's property. Turn around, walk back to your car, and never show your face to my family again." She expected me to break. She expected the public revelation to crush my spirit, forcing me to scream, cry, or hurl desperate, futile accusations of theft. She expected me to behave like a victim stripped of her home. I did not scream. I did not mount a defense. Defending a truth to a crowd invested in a lie merely validates the liar's premise. I weaponized my silence. I let the seconds tick by. 5 seconds, 10 seconds. The polite applause faded. The murmurs died down. The heavy, suffocating vacuum returned to the main tent. The crowd waited for my meltdown, holding their collective breath. I simply stood there, absorbing their scrutiny, letting the sheer, terrifying weight of my calm consume the space. Sylvia's triumphant grin faltered. A microscopic tremor disturbed the corners of her mouth. Her breathing hitched. The silence unnerved her. She expected a battle. She received a stone wall. I shifted my focus. I dismissed Sylvia entirely, turning my head to lock eyes directly with Trent. He stood 15 feet away, the velvet of his midnight blue dinner jacket absorbing the amber bistro light. The moment my gaze caught his, he stopped breathing. I did not look at him with anger. I did not look at him with jealousy. I peeled back the layers of his tailored suit, his leased sports car, and his fabricated tech empire, staring directly at the terrified, cornered grifter underneath. I offered him a smile. It contained absolutely zero warmth. It was a cold, precise baring of teeth, the expression a predator makes right before it severs the spine. I took one deliberate step toward him. The crowd parted further, refusing to block my path. I stopped, ensuring my voice would carry across the quiet distance, but keeping my tone eerily measured and conversational. "I hope you read the terms of that loan very carefully," I stated. The words landed like a physical blow to his chest. Trent's jaw dropped. The remaining bourbon in his glass swayed dangerously close to the rim. The color drained from his face with breathtaking velocity. He knew. The realization slammed into his nervous system. I did not mention the deed. I did not mention the estate. I mentioned the loan, the $5 million bridge loan he desperately required to satisfy the Macau gambling syndicate. He realized instantly that I possessed knowledge of the secondary transaction, the transaction Sylvia and Kelsey knew nothing about. He realized that the sister banished to the shadows possessed a clear, unobstructed view of his offshore laundering network. Kelsey frowned, her smug expression dissolving into confusion. She looked at Trent, then back at me. "What loan?" she demanded, her voice sharp and irritated. "We do not have a loan. This house is a gift." I did not answer her. I kept my eyes locked on Trent, watching the absolute panic paralyze his vocal cords. He could not answer his fiancée. He could not defend himself if he denied the loan. He risked exposing his impending bankruptcy. If he acknowledged the loan, he destroyed the illusion of the wedding gift. He remained trapped in the cage he built. I held his terrified gaze for 3 full seconds, ensuring the hook embedded deeply into his mind. I let the paranoia take root. I let him understand that he uploaded a forged collateral document to a federal server, and I held the receipts. I broke eye contact. I turned my back on Trent, Kelsey, and my mother. I did not rush. I walked down the empty aisle they created for me, my heels clicking a steady, unbothered rhythm against the slate stepping stones. The local elite stepped out of my way, their eyes tracking my departure. The air in the tent felt different now. Sylvia's grand announcement hung in the atmosphere, tainted by the heavy radioactive weight of the cryptic warning I delivered. I crossed the terrace, bypassed the grand marble staircase, and returned to my sedan. I opened the door, slid onto the leather seat, and engaged the ignition. I looked through the windshield one last time. Trent stood exactly where I left him, staring out into the dark driveway, a man rapidly calculating the blast radius of a bomb he could not disarm. Sylvia clutched her pearl necklace, her face flushed, unsettled by the complete failure of her public humiliation. They remained arrogant, clinging to the fabricated deed and the impending wire transfer. They believed they still controlled the timeline. I shifted the car into drive, pulling away from the circular cobblestone driveway. I would let them enjoy their champagne tonight. On Monday morning, the federal government would handle the hangover. Sunday arrived, wrapped in a suffocating, eerie silence. The autumn rain ceased entirely overnight, leaving the city skyline sharp and glaring under the morning sun. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my high-rise apartment, holding a ceramic mug of black coffee. The heat seeped through the thick clay, grounding my hands. The physical restraint required to hold my position bordered on agonizing. The psychological urge to strike immediately clawed at the back of my mind. I possessed the master dossier. I possessed the forged quitclaim deed, the offshore routing hashes, and the audio recording of Sylvia confessing to the theft of my estate. I could end the tension with a single phone call to the local authorities. I could dispatch a patrol car to the property, shatter their Sunday brunch, and drag them into an interrogation room before noon. But I operate in the realm of absolute certainty. If I struck on Sunday, the trap lacked the lethal federal teeth required for total annihilation. An uncompleted transaction leaves a microscopic window for plausible deniability. A slick corporate defense attorney would exploit that window, painting Sylvia's forgery as a draft and Trent's upload as a premature clerical error. They would claim they intended to retract the document before the funds cleared. They might face probation. They might keep their freedom. I refused to grant them a single inch of legal leniency. I required the crime to reach maturity. I pulled away from the window, abandoning the city view, and returned to my workstation. The dual monitors dominated my desk, casting a pale, clinical glow across the room. I engaged the ghost node, re-establishing my invisible connection to the estate's local network. The dashboard populated with the active devices, currently feeding off the router. Trent did not sleep. The telemetry logs displayed a frantic, erratic pattern of digital activity originating from his laptop. His internet protocol address pinged continuously throughout the early hours of the morning. My cryptic warning at the gala mentioning the terms of his loan had successfully fractured his fragile composure. He spent the entire night scouring his own servers, desperately searching for the breach, attempting to secure the gaping holes in his fabricated tech empire. He found nothing. I cover my digital tracks with the precision of a ghost. At exactly 10 o'clock in the morning, his digital behavior shifted. He stopped searching. The desperation of his impending deadline overrode his paranoia. The Macau gambling syndicate demanded their missing capital, and the venture capital firm represented his only remaining lifeline. I initiated a packet-sniffing protocol, mirroring his active session. A duplicate window materialized on my left monitor, allowing me to view his exact screen in real time. Trent navigated to the venture capital firm's secure underwriting portal. The login screen prompted him for his credentials. He typed rapidly, the keystrokes registering on my keylogger. The portal authenticated his identity and granted him access to the pending loan dashboard. A bold, capitalized banner dominated the top of his screen, demanding the outstanding collateral documentation required to release the $5 million. I leaned forward, my chest pressing against the edge of the glass desk. The coil of tension wound to its absolute maximum limit. Trent clicked the upload prompt. A file directory window popped open on his end. He navigated to a folder labeled with Kelsey's name. He selected the high-definition scan of the forged quitclaim deed, the exact document Sylvia backdated and signed with my name on Friday afternoon. He dragged the file into the upload drop zone. I watched the digital progress bar materialize on the screen. The blue line crawled horizontally, representing the data packets fracturing, leaving the estate's local network and transmitting across state lines to the federal lending institution's servers. The progress bar hit 20%, 50%, 80%. He could hit cancel. He could abort the transfer, recognizing the sheer magnitude of the felony he was committing. He could choose to face his bankruptcy instead of federal prison. The blue line hit 100%. A green checkmark flashed across the portal. Trent clicked the final submission button. The screen refreshed, displaying a confirmation receipt. The forged deed officially entered the federal banking system. The crime escalated from domestic forgery to interstate wire fraud in a matter of milliseconds. I exhaled a long, slow breath. My heart hammered a steady, relentless rhythm against my ribs. He crossed the Rubicon. I closed the mirrored session, leaving Trent to his fabricated victory, and pulled up the mechanical timeline of the United States banking system. The timeline dictated my exact window of execution. Because Trent submitted the collateral on a Sunday, the venture capital firm's automated compliance software would hold the transaction in a pending queue. The Federal Reserve's automated clearinghouse does not process multi-million-dollar commercial wire transfers over the weekend. The funds remain securely locked in the lender's legitimate holding accounts. The mechanical gears of the banking system resume operation on Monday morning. At precisely 8 o'clock in the morning, the underwriters arrive at their desks. The automated software clears the pending queue, verifies the presence of the required collateral document, and executes the digital release of the capital. At 8 o'clock in the morning on Monday, the $5 million will exit the legitimate venture capital account and enter Trent's fraudulent Delaware shell company. The moment that capital clears the wire, the trap permanently seals. A completed wire fraud transaction based on stolen collateral triggers a mandatory federal investigation. It guarantees the involvement of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It guarantees federal minimum sentencing guidelines. I mapped my counterstrike to align perfectly with the automated clearinghouse schedule. I opened the heavily encrypted master dossier I compiled on Saturday. The files sat neatly organized within the crimson, sapphire, and emerald directories, the packet-sniffing logs, the offshore Macau routing numbers, the metadata from Sylvia's forgery, and the audio recording of her confession. It all formed an impenetrable weapon of mass financial destruction. I did not intend to route this intelligence through a generic police tip line. I target the apex. I accessed a secure communication gateway utilized by my cybersecurity firm for reporting high-level corporate espionage. I drafted a priority transmission directed to the regional director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's White-Collar Crime Division. I populated the subject line with a sequence of federal statute violations, ensuring the packet bypassed the lower-level analysts and flagged immediately on the director's personal terminal. Next, I opened a secondary transmission line. I utilized an industry contact to acquire the direct. unlisted email address for the executive vice president of fraud detection at the specific bank backing the venture capital firm. I attached the master dossier to both transmissions. I drafted a concise clinical executive summary in the body of the emails. I detailed the exact routing numbers involved in the impending $5 million transfer. I provided the Macau syndicate hashes. I outlined the identity theft and the forged real estate collateral. I did not send the transmissions. I programmed a delayed execution trigger. I coded a script to hold the data packets in a suspended state on my secure server. I set the release timer for exactly 7:59 in the morning on Monday. 1 minute before the $5 million cleared the automated clearinghouse, the federal authorities and the bank's fraud executives would receive the absolute, undeniable proof of the crime. The bank's algorithms would detect the massive threat instantly, throwing a catastrophic red flag on Trent's accounts. The federal agents would view the active cartel links and mobilize tactical units before Trent even finished his morning espresso. I locked the terminal, sealing the program trigger behind my biometric verification. The 48-hour wait entered its final stretch. Sunday afternoon bled into Sunday evening. The sun dipped below the city skyline, casting long, encroaching shadows across my apartment. I walked away from the monitors. I prepared a simple dinner, slicing vegetables with a steady, unhurried precision. Ate in silence, my mind completely detached from the emotional wreckage of my family. I did not mourn the mother who betrayed me. I did not pity the sister who gleefully aided in my eviction. I felt nothing for the arrogant grifter who attempted to leverage my 12 years of hard work to save his own miserable life. They spent the weekend celebrating under white canvas tents, drinking expensive champagne. Fully convinced they successfully discarded me, they believed their social status shielded them from consequence. They slept soundly on Sunday night. Dreaming of the millions they expected to inherit in the morning, I slept with the cold, absolute peace of an architect who knows her structure will hold. The alarm on my nightstand remained silent. My internal clock woke me at exactly 6 o'clock in the morning on Monday. I rose from the mattress, the crisp morning air chilling my skin. I pulled on a structured, dark gray suit, buttoning the blazer with deliberate, methodical movements. Today required a completely different uniform. Today, I did not need to play the silent observer at a crowded gala. Today, I executed the eviction. I walked into my home office. The dual monitors glowed, displaying the active countdown timer attached to the transmission script. 1 hour and 59 minutes remained until the digital guillotine dropped. I sat in the ergonomic chair, folded my hands on the glass desk, and waited for the banking world to wake up. The digital clock on my secondary monitor shifted to 7:45 in the morning. The harsh white digits severed the quiet darkness of my home office. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, interlacing my fingers, and exhaled a slow, controlled breath. The mechanical gears of the American financial system ground to life, shaking off the weekend dormancy. 10 miles away, in the heart of the downtown commercial district, Trent occupied a corner office on the 40th floor of a glass-walled skyscraper. He did not code. He did not build software. He leased the expensive real estate to project the illusion of a thriving enterprise. I accessed the building's internal security feed, tapping into the camera mounted directly above his mahogany desk. Trent gripped a tiny ceramic espresso cup. His thumb traced the rim in rapid, erratic circles. He stared at his dual monitors, tracking his corporate banking dashboard. He hit the refresh key every 15 seconds. The screen displayed a near zero balance, a bleeding ledger waiting for the $5 million transfusion. He adjusted the cuffs of his tailored shirt, wiping a bead of sweat from his temple. He needed the capital to clear the venture capital firm's escrow account at exactly 8 o'clock. Once the funds populated his account, he planned to execute a secondary, offshore wire transfer to the Macau gambling syndicate by 8:15. He believed he stood 15 minutes away from surviving the syndicate's wrath. Across the city, Sylvia and Kelsey operated under a vastly different, yet equally arrogant, delusion. They secured a private, VIP appointment at an exclusive bridal boutique in the upscale shopping district. Sylvia demanded the doors open an hour before standard operating times, weaponizing the promise of a massive commission to force the boutique manager's compliance. I tracked their location through the global positioning system chip active in Kelsey's smartphone. I envisioned the scene with clinical accuracy. Sylvia undoubtedly paced the imported marble floors, holding a crystal flute of complimentary champagne. She inspected the racks of imported silk and French lace, her posture radiating the entitlement of a woman who just stole a multi-million-dollar estate. Kelsey sat on a velvet ottoman, crossing her legs, flipping a heavy, black metal corporate card between her manicured fingers. Trent handed her the card on Sunday night, assuring her the $5 million bridge loan guaranteed an unlimited spending limit by Monday morning. They planned to drop $30,000 on a custom wedding gown, financing their aristocratic cosplay with stolen collateral. The clock shifted to 7:50. I turned my attention to the primary monitor. The terminal window displayed the underlying architecture of the automated clearinghouse network. I visualized the digital staging ground. Deep within the secure servers of the venture capital firm's primary bank, the $5 million sat in a holding queue. The underwriting software analyzed the uploaded files over the weekend. The system verified the presence of the quitclaim deed Trent submitted, lacking human intuition. The software accepted the forged signature and the fraudulent notary stamp as legitimate data points. The automated protocol removed the preliminary hold, placing the massive wire transfer in the final execution queue, waiting for the system-wide release command scheduled for the top of the hour. I cracked my knuckles, the sharp pops echoing in the silent room. The clock hit 7:58. The countdown timer on my transmission script dropped to 60 seconds. I did not touch the mouse. I did not override the system. I sat perfectly still, letting the code execute the execution order. The seconds bled away. 10, 9, 8. At precisely 7:59, the terminal screen flashed a vibrant, solid green. The transmission script executed. My server shattered the master dossier into thousands of encrypted data packets. The packets launched across the fiber optic network. Traveling at the speed of light, they bypassed the standard, congested civilian routing nodes, routing the priority broadband channels straight toward their terminal destinations. The first data packet slammed into the secure external gateway of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's white-collar crime division. The federal firewall analyzed the incoming transmission, detecting the specific sequences of criminal statutes I embedded in the subject line. The firewall granted immediate clearance. The dossier bypassed the lower-level analyst queues, landing directly on the active terminal of Special Agent Caldwell, a veteran investigator specializing in international money laundering. Simultaneously, the secondary data packet penetrated the fraud detection servers of Trent's lending institution. The information gap officially closed. Inside the federal server farm, an automated threat assessment algorithm ingested my master dossier. The software operated with cold, merciless efficiency. It stripped the metadata from Sylvia's forged quitclaim deed, confirming the fraudulent origin. It parsed the internet protocol logs, verifying Trent uploaded the forgery to secure a commercial loan. Then, the algorithm reached the third section of the dossier. It extracted the routing hashes attached to Trent's Delaware shell companies. It traced the digital pathways, pulling the destination account numbers located in the Cayman Islands and Macau. The algorithm fed those specific alphanumeric sequences into the active federal watch lists. The cross-reference took less than a fraction of a second. The system returned a catastrophic, undeniable match. The destination accounts linked directly to a known, heavily monitored international gambling syndicate currently under joint investigation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and Interpol. Deep inside the federal building, a high-decibel alarm triggered across the digital dashboards of the cybercrime unit. The threat level escalated instantly. This was no longer a localized property dispute or a minor corporate embezzlement case. Trent bridged a legitimate American venture capital firm directly to a radioactive, blacklisted criminal enterprise. Agent Caldwell opened the file. I could picture the veteran agent leaning closer to his monitor, his eyes scanning the pristine, color-coded evidence. The dossier handed him the entire syndicate laundering operation on a silver platter. He possessed the probable cause, the routing numbers, and the physical location of the suspect. He reached for his desk phone, shouting commands to mobilize a tactical arrest team. At the exact same moment, the banking algorithms reacted to the incoming data packet. The lending institution's anti-money laundering software read the federal alert embedded in my transmission. Banks possess zero tolerance for cartel exposure. The risk management protocol enacted an immediate, system-wide lockdown. The software located Trent's corporate accounts, his personal checking accounts, and the black metal credit cards he distributed to his fiancée. The system slammed a hard, impenetrable digital freeze across his entire portfolio. The clock on my desk ticked to exactly 8 o'clock in the morning. On my secondary monitor, I watched the live security feed of Trent's corner office. The automated clearinghouse gate opened, processing millions of transactions across the country. Trent stopped tapping his espresso cup. He grabbed his mouse, dragging the cursor to the refresh icon on his banking portal. He clicked the button, fully expecting the $5 million balance to populate his screen, granting him the capital required to save his life. The browser window loaded, the screen refreshed. Trent did not see $5 million. He saw a stark, glaring red error banner stretching across the top of his dashboard. The text read, "Account suspended, Code Patriot Act violation. Please contact federal authorities." Trent dropped the ceramic espresso cup. It shattered against the polished hardwood floor, splashing hot, dark liquid across his Italian leather shoes. He stared at the monitor, his jaw unhinging. He clicked the refresh button again, mashing his finger against the plastic mouse. He pounded the keyboard. The red banner remained completely static, mocking his frantic, desperate inputs. He lost his lifeline. He lost the syndicate's money. He lost the venture capital funds. The automated system froze the wire transfer mid-flight. The $5 million never entered his account. It reverted to the lender's secure holding ledger, quarantined by the federal fraud alert. Trent pushed his leather chair back, the wheels catching on the edge of a custom rug. He stood up, his hands gripping his hair. He paced the length of his glass-walled office, moving with the erratic, blind panic of a man who just realized he stepped on a landmine. He reached into his suit pocket, pulling out his smartphone. He dialed a number, holding the device to his ear, his chest heaving with rapid, shallow gasps. I knew exactly who he attempted to call. He needed to warn Sylvia. He needed to tell her the collateral failed, the loan collapsed, and the federal government just locked his entire existence. I smiled, watching him pace on the silent video feed. I opened a separate command terminal on my laptop. I highlighted the estate's primary router. I typed a single, definitive line of code and hit the enter key. I severed the estate's external network connection entirely. I blacked out their Wi-Fi. I disabled the local cellular repeaters I installed years ago to boost the signal inside the stone walls of the property. Trent's call dropped. He stared at his phone screen. A localized dead zone severing his communication. Sylvia and Kelsey remained entirely blind, shopping for imported lace, wholly unaware that the credit card in their hands now carried the radioactive weight of a federal indictment. The wire transfer failed. The digital guillotine dropped. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, folded my hands on the glass desk, and prepared to watch the tactical fallout sweep across the city. The digital clock on my desk shifted to exactly 8:15 in the morning. On my secondary monitor, the live surveillance feed from the downtown tech headquarters displayed a man rapidly asphyxiating on his own hubris. Trent stood paralyzed in front of his mahogany desk. The red Patriot Act warning banner remained burned across his computer screen, a permanent, glaring blockade halting the $5 million wire transfer. He lunged for the office landline, his hands shaking so violently he knocked a stack of fabricated financial projections onto the hardwood floor. He snatched the receiver and aggressively punched the digits for the estate's primary phone line. He pressed the plastic to his ear, his chest heaving, desperate to warn Sylvia that the collateral triggered a federal lockdown. I watched his facial muscles contort as the line returned a flat, dead tone. He slammed the receiver back onto the cradle and grabbed his smartphone, swiping frantically to dial Kelsey's number. The call failed. The network routing dropped into the void. I had severed the estate's external fiber optic connection and jammed the localized cellular repeaters. The property sat in a complete digital blackout. Trent screamed, a soundless explosion of panic captured on the silent video feed, and hurled his smartphone against the tempered glass wall of his office. The device shattered, raining glass and plastic across the carpet. He trapped himself in a soundproof box, entirely cut off from his co-conspirators. They were flying blindly into a federal storm, utterly incapable of coordinating a defense. A sharp, syncopated vibration rattled the glass surface of my desk. My encrypted secondary mobile device illuminated. The caller identification software did not display a name or a standard phone number. It rendered a scrambled alphanumeric sequence, the distinct digital fingerprint of a masked federal routing node. I picked up the device, pressed the acceptance icon, and brought the speaker to my ear. I did not offer a greeting. "Am I speaking to the architect of the Ironwood dossier?" a voice demanded. The tone carried the low, gravelly cadence of a veteran interrogator, stripping away any bureaucratic pleasantries. "You are," I replied, my voice perfectly level. "This is Special Agent Caldwell, Federal Bureau of Investigation, White Collar Crime Division," the man stated. "I am currently staring at a data packet that bypassed 3 levels of federal cybersecurity to land directly on my primary terminal. The routing hashes you provided link a domestic venture capital application to an active international money laundering syndicate." "The Macau Syndicate," I confirmed, "and the Delaware shell companies acting as the digital washing machine." Caldwell paused. I heard the faint rustle of heavy paper and the clicking of a keyboard on his end of the line. "Civilians do not compile packet-sniffing logs with this level of granularity. Civilians do not extract biometric metadata from forged quitclaim deeds. I need to know the origin of this intelligence before I authorize a federal raid based on an anonymous transmission." He sought to establish my credibility. He needed to verify he was not reading a fabricated hit piece engineered by a rival corporate entity. "I am not a civilian, Agent Caldwell," I stated, leaning forward into the microphone. "I serve as a senior cybersecurity architect. For the past 12 years, I have built and audited enterprise-level encryption networks for multinational financial institutions. I own the physical estate listed on that forged collateral document. I established a ghost node on the property's local router. I intercepted the unencrypted traffic originating from the suspect's device, parsed the outbound telemetry, and traced the stolen seed capital straight to the Cayman Islands. If you inspect the 4th section of the dossier, you will find the exact transaction hashes mapping the illicit funds to the syndicate's holding accounts." The skepticism evaporated from the agent's cadence. The silence stretched, filled only by the rhythmic tapping of a pen against a desk. He did not treat me like a hysterical victim reporting a stolen house. He recognized the clinical, ruthless efficiency of a fellow investigator. "The data is pristine," Caldwell conceded, his tone shifting from suspicion to absolute, focused authority. "The lending institution executed a hard freeze on the $5 million at 8 o'clock flat. We cross-referenced your metadata analysis on the quitclaim deed with the county clerk's registry. The forgery is confirmed. The suspect is currently located in his corner office on the 40th floor of the downtown commercial district," I informed him, watching Trent pace erratically on my monitor. "He destroyed his primary communication device 3 minutes ago." "He will not need a phone where he is going," Caldwell replied, the sound of a heavy chair pushing back echoing through the receiver. "My tactical units breached the lobby of his corporate headquarters exactly 2 minutes ago. They secured the building perimeter and are currently ascending in the freight elevators." "And the co-conspirators?" I asked, my eyes tracking the global positioning system blip, indicating Kelsey and Sylvia's location at the upscale bridal boutique. "Their financial assets are entirely frozen under the Patriot Act statutes," Caldwell confirmed. "Local law enforcement has been briefed on the property fraud. You possess the green light to reclaim your estate. We will handle the architect of the laundering operation." "Thank you, Agent Caldwell," I said. "No," Caldwell countered, the hint of a grim smile coloring his final words. "Thank you for the complete roadmap. We have hunted that Macau routing network for 18 months. Have a productive Monday." The line disconnected, leaving a hollow dial tone. I set the encrypted device back onto the glass desk. The execution possessed the unstoppable, crushing momentum of a freight train. The federal government seized the reins. I looked back at the surveillance feed. Trent collapsed onto his leather desk chair, burying his face in his trembling hands. The custom suit crumpled around his shoulders. He possessed no escape route. The venture capital funds remained locked. The gambling syndicate enforcers expected their ransom. He completely exhausted his fabricated runway. Miles away, bathed in the soft, flattering light of the luxury bridal boutique, Sylvia and Kelsey continued their arrogant charade. I imagined the scene with crystalline clarity. They likely sipped complimentary sparkling water, running their hands over imported French lace, oblivious to the fact that their names now sat on federal warrants. They believed the $5 million cleared. They believed the forged quitclaim deed successfully severed my connection to the family. They expected to spend the afternoon spending stolen capital, solidifying their aristocratic facade. They did not realize the black metal corporate card resting in Kelsey's designer purse now functioned as a digital tracking device, linking them directly to a massive racketeering indictment. The digital guillotine dropped, cleanly severing their fabricated empire from reality. I stood up from my ergonomic chair. I smoothed the lapels of my dark gray suit. I reached across the desk and picked up a thick, physical leather portfolio containing the original, certified trust documents proving my 12 years of absolute ownership over the estate. The time for digital observation concluded. The physical reclamation commenced. I walked out of my home office, the heavy portfolio gripped firmly in my hand, ready to sweep the remaining debris off my property. The dashboard digital clock shifted to exactly 9 o'clock in the morning. I parked my sedan along the rain-slicked curb of the downtown commercial district. I cut the engine and engaged the parking brake. Across the avenue stood Trent's corporate headquarters, a towering monolith of tempered glass and steel, designed to project the illusion of impenetrable technological supremacy. The ground floor lobby functioned like a massive, transparent fishbowl. Commuters bustled past the floor-to-ceiling windows. Interns swiped security badges at the sleek electronic turnstiles. Baristas operated espresso machines in the corner cafe, handing steaming paper cups to executives in tailored suits. I stepped out of my vehicle, crossing the busy avenue, blending seamlessly into the morning pedestrian traffic. I secured a vantage point near a concrete planter directly outside the primary entrance. I possessed a clear, unobstructed sightline into the expansive marble lobby. I waited for the federal hammer to drop. The strike did not announce itself with blaring sirens or flashing red and blue lights. Federal agencies executing high-level financial warrants operate with synchronized, lethal precision. They prefer the element of absolute surprise. A fleet of 4, unmarked, black sport utility vehicles merged aggressively into the loading zone directly in front of the glass doors. The heavy tires ground against the wet concrete, boxing in the perimeter. The doors of the vehicles swung open simultaneously. Over 24 federal agents poured onto the sidewalk in a fluid, kinetic wave. They wore crisp, navy blue windbreakers emblazoned with the bright yellow lettering of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They did not pause. They breached the building. The agents bypassed the revolving doors entirely, pulling open the wide, handicap-accessible side entrances and flooding the pristine lobby. The ambient, buzzing hum of the morning corporate commute died in a single heartbeat. The baristas stopped steaming milk. The executives froze mid-step, their expensive leather briefcases hanging suspended by their sides. Building security guards instinctively reached for their hip radios, stepping forward to intercept the intrusion. The lead agents raised their hands, flashing solid gold badges, projecting an authority that instantly paralyzed the private security force. The tactical teams split into distinct units. One squad locked down the turnstiles, establishing a hard perimeter to prevent anyone from entering or exiting the facility. A secondary squad secured the elevator banks, overriding the digital call buttons with federal access keys. Trent possessed zero chance of a clean escape. I kept my eyes locked on the brushed steel doors of the executive elevator bank. 45 minutes had passed since the Patriot Act warning banner locked his fraudulent accounts. 45 minutes since he shattered his smartphone against his office window. He likely spent that time frantically emptying his desk safe, destroying hard drives, and stuffing whatever cash he kept on hand into a bag. He attempted to run, hoping to slip out the freight exit before the Macau gambling syndicate or the federal authorities tracked his location. The digital floor indicator above the executive elevator illuminated. The steel doors slid apart. Trent stepped into the lobby. He did not project the arrogant, polished swagger of a Silicon Valley disruptor. He carried a heavy leather duffel bag over his shoulder. His midnight blue suit jacket hung open, wrinkled and disheveled. Sweat glistened on his forehead, catching the harsh glare of the recessed lobby lighting. His eyes darted frantically toward the main exit. He saw the Navy windbreakers swarming the reception desk. The realization hit his nervous system like a physical shockwave. He stopped dead in his tracks. His custom Italian leather shoes skidded slightly against the polished marble floor. The color completely drained from his face, leaving his complexion a sickly, translucent white. He dropped the heavy leather duffel bag. It hit the marble with a dull, heavy thud, the sound echoing through the paralyzed lobby. Trent pivoted violently, abandoning the main plaza. He sprinted toward the rear of the building, shoving past a terrified receptionist and barreling toward the service corridor, leading to the freight loading docks. He believed he possessed a microscopic window of escape. He believed he could outrun a federal dragnet. He never reached the service doors. Agent Caldwell anticipated the flight risk, a secondary tactical team, positioned precisely for this containment protocol, breached the rear freight entrance the moment the primary team secured the front. 3 federal agents emerged from the service corridor, moving with terrifying, uncompromising force. They collided directly with Trent. The physical impact knocked the breath entirely from his lungs. Trent flailed, his arms swinging in a desperate, uncoordinated attempt to break their grip. The agents did not tolerate the resistance. They drove him backward into the main lobby, utilizing his own momentum against him. They slammed his chest against a massive, load-bearing concrete pillar located near the cafe. The impact reverberated through the cavernous space. The air rushed out of Trent's lungs in a loud, ragged gasp. The side of his face pressed hard against the cold, unforgiving concrete. His custom-tailored suit jacket bunched up around his neck, the expensive fabric wrinkling and tearing at the shoulder seam under the brute force of the tactical agents. The struggle lasted less than 4 seconds. An agent grabbed Trent's right wrist, twisting his arm sharply and painfully behind his back. The agent secured his left arm, crossing the wrists. The sharp, heavy metallic clink of steel handcuffs snapping shut sliced through the dead silence of the lobby. The sound possessed a brutal, permanent finality. The tech titan, the man who spent his life projecting ultimate superiority, was reduced to a subdued, handcuffed criminal in front of his entire workforce. Special Agent Caldwell stepped into the clearing. Separating himself from the perimeter guard, he walked slowly toward the concrete pillar, his posture radiating stoic, immovable authority. He stopped 2 feet away from Trent. The agents pulled Trent slightly away from the pillar, forcing him to stand upright. Trent's knees buckled. He hung suspended by the grip of the tactical team, his chest heaving, his eyes wide and dilated with sheer, unadulterated terror. Caldwell did not lower his voice. He intended for the entire lobby to hear the charges. He intended to strip away the illusion of the thriving tech enterprise, exposing the rotten, criminal core underneath. "You have the right to remain silent," Caldwell's voice boomed off the marble walls, echoing with absolute clarity. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." Trent shook his head frantically, drops of sweat flying from his brow. He gasped for air, struggling to form a coherent sentence. "This is a mistake. You have the wrong man. I run a legitimate technology firm. I demand to call my legal counsel." Caldwell ignored the pathetic protest. He pulled a folded federal warrant from the inner pocket of his windbreaker and held it directly in front of Trent's face. "You are being placed under federal arrest for multiple counts of aggravated wire fraud, bank fraud, and conspiracy to defraud a lending institution," Caldwell stated, delivering the execution order. "Furthermore, You are facing secondary indictments for international money laundering and active racketeering in direct connection with a blacklisted gambling syndicate operating out of Macau. The words hung in the sterile air of the lobby. The employees standing near the turnstiles gasped. A young intern dropped a cardboard tray of coffees, the hot liquid splashing across the pristine floor. Executives pulled out their smartphones, their thumbs flying across screens to record the total annihilation of their chief executive officer. Trent stopped struggling. The fight completely evaporated from his muscles. The mention of the Macau syndicate broke his mind. He realized the federal government possessed the entire blueprint of his digital washing machine. He realized the $5 million wire transfer failed. The forged collateral triggered the alarm, and the offshore routing numbers betrayed him. He looked down at the marble floor, his chin dropping to his chest, a broken, defeated shell. I stood outside the glass windows, observing the wreckage. I did not feel a rush of vindictive joy. I felt a profound, chilling sense of closure. I built the digital guillotine, and the blade dropped with flawless, mathematical precision. The tactical agents hauled Trent toward the revolving doors, dragging him past the crowd of shocked, recording employees. They marched him out onto the sidewalk, shoving his head down as they loaded him into the back of a waiting black sport utility vehicle. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing his fate behind tinted bulletproof glass. I turned away from the concrete planter. I adjusted the grip on my heavy leather portfolio, the certified trust documents resting securely inside. The first target was successfully neutralized, securely locked in the custody of the federal government. The secondary targets currently occupied an upscale bridal boutique across the city, entirely oblivious to the federal storm wiping out their fabricated empire. I walked back to my sedan, unlocked the door, and slid onto the leather seat. I engaged the ignition, steering the vehicle away from the flashing lights of the tactical convoy. It was time to pull the rug out from under Sylvia and Kelsey. While the federal tactical units hauled Trent into the back of a sport utility vehicle, Sylvia and Kelsey inhabited an entirely different reality across the city. 10 miles away, the global positioning system tracker in Kelsey's smartphone pinpointed their location inside an exclusive bridal boutique situated in the upscale shopping district. I knew the establishment. The storefront featured imported Italian marble, frosted glass, and heavily armed private security flanking the mahogany double doors. They catered strictly to the elite, requiring proof of assets simply to book a fitting. Sylvia and Kelsey secured the premier VIP suite an hour before standard opening time. I monitored the financial pings attempting to breach the federal firewall, visualizing the scene unfolding in the boutique with absolute, crystalline clarity. Kelsey stood on a circular velvet pedestal, drowning in layers of hand-stitched French lace and imported silk. Sylvia reclined on a plush tufted sofa, sipping complimentary sparkling wine from a crystal flute. They believed they conquered the world. They believed the $5 million wire transfer cleared at 8 o'clock, cementing their aristocratic status. They operated under the arrogant assumption that the forged quitclaim deed successfully eliminated me from their lives, granting them unlimited access to Trent's corporate wealth. Kelsey twirled, admiring her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling gilded mirrors. She selected the most extravagant gown in the inventory, an intricate custom-fitted piece carrying a staggering price tag of $30,000. "We will take it," Sylvia announced, setting her crystal flute onto a mirrored side table. She stood, smoothing the front of her designer trench coat. "Wrap it immediately. My daughter requires nothing but the absolute best." The boutique director, a sharply dressed man named Henri, bowed his head in deference. He possessed a keen radar for wealth and spent the morning fawning over their fabricated status. He ushered them toward the polished obsidian checkout counter, his assistant scurrying to carefully package the voluminous silk gown into a branded garment bag. Kelsey approached the register, her posture radiating toxic entitlement. She reached into her designer purse and withdrew the heavy, black metal corporate card Trent gave her the night before. She dropped it onto the obsidian counter. The metal clacked sharply against the stone. "Put the alterations on there as well," Kelsey instructed, her tone dismissive. She did not even look at Henri. She inspected her manicured fingernails, assuming the transaction required zero effort. Henry smiled, retrieving the black card. He inserted the metallic chip into the encrypted payment terminal. He tapped the touchscreen, inputting the $30,000 charge, and hit process. The system established a connection with the bank's servers. At that exact moment, the Patriot Act freeze dominated Trent's entire financial portfolio. The federal lockdown severed every credit line, froze every asset, and revoked every authorization tied to his name. The payment terminal emitted a harsh, discordant beep. The screen flashed a glaring crimson red. The text displayed a single, devastating word: declined. Henry frowned. The obsequious smile faltered, replaced by a subtle grimace of professional embarrassment. He extracted the black card, wiping the metallic chip against his pristine suit jacket. "My apologies, madam," Henri murmured, keeping his voice low to preserve the dignity of the boutique. "It appears we have a slight connection error. The terminal rejected the authorization. Let me attempt the transaction one more time." He reinserted the card. He hit the button. The machine shrieked again, a louder, more aggressive tone. The crimson error banner remained static. Kelsey dropped her hand. She stared at the payment terminal, her brow furrowing in genuine irritation. She did not comprehend the failure. She believed she wielded infinite capital. "Run it manually," Kelsey snapped, her voice rising, fracturing the hushed, exclusive atmosphere of the boutique. "Trent told me the limit is uncapped. Your machine is broken." "The machine is functioning perfectly, miss," Henry replied, his tone cooling significantly. The deference evaporated, replaced by the rigid suspicion of a merchant dealing with fraudulent customers. "The bank is explicitly instructing me to retain the card. The account is suspended." Sylvia marched forward, her heels clicking aggressively against the marble floor. She shoved Kelsey aside, determined to salvage the transaction and preserve their high society illusion. "Do not be ridiculous," Sylvia hissed, glaring at Henry. "My future son-in-law executes multi-million-dollar venture capital deals before breakfast. His bank probably flagged the purchase because it occurred out of state. It is a simple security hold. I will cover the gown." Sylvia unclasped her designer handbag. She dug through the leather interior and extracted her personal platinum credit card. She slapped the plastic onto the counter, shooting Henri a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. "Use this," Sylvia commanded, "and I expect a discount for the inconvenience you just caused my daughter." Henry picked up the platinum card. He slid the magnetic strip through the reader. He did not know that Sylvia's name currently sat on a federal warrant for aggravated bank fraud. He did not know that Agent Caldwell's algorithms cross-referenced the forged quitclaim deed, linking Sylvia's social security number directly to Trent's money laundering syndicate. The federal government locks co-conspirator accounts instantly to prevent capital flight. The terminal processed the data. Beep. The red error banner materialized again. Declined. Account frozen. Sylvia's breath hitched. The blood ceased flowing to her face, draining her complexion of all color. Her hand froze halfway back to her purse. She stared at the screen, her mind desperately attempting to process an impossible reality. "Try my other card," Sylvia stammered, her voice losing its commanding edge. She ripped a gold debit card from her wallet and shoved it at Henri. "Use the secondary account, now." Henri processed the gold card. Declined. He placed the useless plastic back onto the obsidian counter. He did not smile. He did not apologize. He stepped back, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked at Sylvia and Kelsey not as elite aristocrats, but as common grifters attempting to steal $30,000 worth of merchandise. "All of your accounts are locked, madame," Henri stated, his voice ringing with cold, absolute finality. He gestured to his assistants. The women immediately grabbed the branded garment bag containing the custom silk gown and retreated to the back room, securing the inventory. "No! Wait, this is a mistake!" Kelsey cried, her entitlement shattering into frantic desperation. She reached across the counter, grabbing Henry's sleeve. "Call Trent, Mom, call Trent right now. He needs to fix this." Sylvia snatched her smartphone from her purse. Her hands shook violently. She dialed Trent's number, pressing the device to her ear. The call dropped into a dead void. She tried again. Nothing. She attempted to call the estate, hoping to reach the landline. "I sat in my sedan miles away, entirely responsible for the digital blackout smothering her communication lines." "I cannot reach him," Sylvia whispered, her eyes wide, darting wildly around the boutique. Panic hijacked her nervous system. The foundation of her fabricated empire cracked beneath her feet. "The calls will not connect." Henry stepped out from behind the counter. He signaled the two heavily armed private security guards stationed by the mahogany double doors. The men stepped forward, their massive frames casting long, intimidating shadows across the marble floor. "I must ask you both to leave the premises immediately," Henry ordered, pointing toward the exit. "We do not tolerate fraud in this establishment. Exit now, or I will involve the local authorities." Sylvia opened her mouth to argue, to deploy her usual cocktail of gaslighting and intimidation. But the sight of the advancing security guards choked the words in her throat. The illusion collapsed. She possessed no leverage. She possessed no capital. The guards flanked them, escorting Sylvia and Kelsey out of the VIP suite, marching them past the racks of imported lace and the crystal displays. They shoved the mahogany doors open, forcing the two women out into the unforgiving chill of the October morning. The heavy doors slammed shut behind them, the brass deadbolts sliding into place with a definitive, metallic thud. I watched the telemetry data stream across my encrypted mobile device. I tracked their movements as they stumbled away from the storefront, stopping near the edge of the busy avenue. They stood on the concrete sidewalk, the biting wind whipping through their hair. The luxury bubble popped, abandoning them in the harsh, chaotic reality of the city. Kelsey shivered, wrapping her arms around her chest. She pulled out her smartphone, opening a popular ride-sharing application. She tapped the screen, requesting a premium black car to transport them back to the estate. The application processed the request, pinging her digital wallet for the holding fee. The screen flashed a familiar, devastating error. Insufficient funds. Payment method invalid. Kelsey deleted the premium selection, opting for a standard sedan, declined. She tried linking a new card. The federal firewall rejected the input. "Mom," Kelsey whimpered, tears of sheer panic welling in her eyes. "My phone will not call a car. The app says my cards are dead. I have no cash. How do we get home?" Sylvia stared at her phone screen, refreshing her banking application over and over again. The balance displayed 0. A federal hold icon covered her checking and savings accounts. The reality of the situation crashed down upon her, crushing her lungs. She did not just lose the $30,000 dress, she lost access to her entire existence. They possessed no cash, they possessed no credit, they possessed no means of communication with Trent. They stood on the bustling sidewalk, two disgraced grifters stripped of their fake aristocracy, entirely stranded. I placed my phone into the center console of my sedan. The digital traps executed flawlessly. The secondary targets hit rock bottom. I shifted the car into drive, pulling away from the downtown commercial district. I steered the vehicle towards the highway, navigating back toward the estate. It was time to deliver the final, physical blow. The dashboard clock in my sedan marked exactly 1 o'clock in the afternoon when I parked beneath the portico of the estate. The white canvas tents from Saturday's gala had been dismantled, leaving flattened patches of pale grass across the lawn. The autumn wind swept dry leaves across the circular cobblestone driveway. Standing on the wide stone steps of the front porch were 2 armed county sheriff deputies, their squad cars idling near the perimeter hedges. Their gold star badges caught the pale afternoon light. I stepped out of my vehicle, holding the thick leather portfolio securely under my arm. Inside sat the original, certified trust documents dating back to 2014, the stamped warranty deeds from the bank foreclosure, and 12 years of uninterrupted property tax receipts. I climbed the stone stairs. Deputy Miller, a veteran officer with silver hair and a stern expression, gave me a respectful nod. "We reviewed the filings, Ms. Vance," Miller said, his hand resting on his tactical belt. "The certified deed from the county recorder's office and the emergency writ are in order. The local magistrate signed off on the immediate possession order 20 minutes ago." "Thank you, Deputy," I replied, keeping my voice even. "They should arrive shortly." 5 minutes later, the low, mechanical rumble of a diesel engine echoed from the road. A municipal transit bus ground to a halt at the opening of the wrought-iron gates. The pneumatic doors hissed open. Two figures stepped down onto the asphalt shoulder of the highway, their silhouettes stark against the overcast sky. Sylvia and Kelsey. They possess no luxury sports car. They possess no private rideshare, having exhausted their credit and with their digital accounts paralyzed by federal holds. They had scrounged loose change from the bottom of Sylvia's designer purse to pay for public transit. They trudged up the quarter-mile driveway on foot. I observed their approach from the elevated vantage point of the porch. The facade of the untouchable socialites had completely disintegrated. Kelsey dragged her feet, her high-end designer flats caked in road dust, her bare ankles red from the biting wind. Her tailored blouse was wrinkled, and her mascara was smudged beneath her swollen eyes. Sylvia walked half a pace ahead, clutching her designer coat tightly around her throat. Mud splattered the hem of her trousers. Her carefully styled hair had fallen into disarray, whipped into wild tangles by the transit ride. Yet, as she rounded the final curve of the driveway and saw the house standing intact, a flicker of delusional defiance returned to her posture. She saw the front door, and she believed she had reached her sanctuary. Then, her eyes lifted to the grand porch. She saw me. Sylvia stopped dead in her tracks. 20 feet from the base of the marble staircase. Kelsey bumped into her back, letting out a sharp whine of exhaustion. Both women stared upward, their gazes darting from my tailored gray suit to the two armed deputies standing on either side of me. The presence of law enforcement should have warned her. A rational person would have recognized the trap snapping shut. But Sylvia was blinded by 12 years of unearned entitlement. She believed the forged quitclaim deed in Trent's possession rendered her the undisputed ruler of the estate. Sylvia lunged forward, her heels clicking aggressively against the cobblestones as she marched toward the stairs. "What is the meaning of this?" Sylvia shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "How dare you stand on that porch, officers? Arrest this woman immediately. She is trespassing on private property." Kelsey staggered up behind her, her voice shrill with hysteria. "She hacked our gate. She has been harassing us all weekend. Tell her to leave so I can go to bed." Neither Deputy Miller nor his partner moved. They stood like concrete pillars, their expressions unyielding. I stepped forward, stopping at the edge of the top step. I opened the leather portfolio, withdrawing the crisp, certified legal packet bearing the raised golden seal of the State Circuit Court. "You are not giving orders here, Sylvia," I stated, my tone slicing through her screeching complaints. Sylvia scoffed, throwing her head back in a desperate, mocking laugh. "You delusional little girl, the house belongs to Kelsey and Trent. I signed the deed myself. The paperwork is filed. You have no rights here." "You signed my name to a fraudulent instrument," I replied, holding up the document so the embossed seal caught the light, "and you submitted that instrument across state lines to a federal lending institution to secure a $5 million commercial bridge loan." The mention of the $5 million hit Sylvia like a physical wall. Her mouth remained open, but the laughter died instantly. "How do you—" Sylvia stammered, her hands trembling as she pulled her coat tighter. "Trent handled the financing." "Trent is currently sitting in a federal holding cell downtown," I stated, dropping the execution order with clinical precision. "He was arrested at 9 o'clock this morning by the Federal Bureau of Investigation for wire fraud, bank fraud, and international money laundering for a shadow gambling syndicate." Kelsey let out a strangled gasp, her hands flying to her mouth. She staggered sideways, catching herself against the stone railing of the stairs. No, that is a lie. Trent is a founder. He is a millionaire." "Trent is an embezzler facing 20 years in a federal penitentiary," I countered, looking down at my younger sister without a shred of pity. "And because your mother forged my signature on that deed to collateralize his loan, both of you are officially named as co-conspirators in a federal bank fraud indictment. That is why your credit cards failed at the bridal boutique. That is why your digital bank accounts are locked under the Patriot Act." Sylvia's face turned the color of damp chalk. Her knees buckled slightly, but she grabbed the wrought-iron banister, desperately trying to maintain her footing. "You cannot do this," Sylvia whispered, her voice cracking into a thin, pathetic rasp. Even if the deed is contested. We have lived here for 12 years. We have tenant rights. You cannot lock us out without a 30-day eviction notice. The law protects us." She clung to her final legal technicality like a drowning person clutching a stone. She believed she could stall, that she could barricade herself inside the master bedroom and force me through months of grueling civil litigation. I closed the portfolio with a sharp, decisive snap. "Under state statute, tenant protections apply to legitimate leaseholders," I said, my voice dropping to a low, authoritative register. "The moment you executed a fraudulent quitclaim deed and attempted to convey title of this property through criminal forgery, you committed an intentional breach of tenancy. You committed an aggravated felony on the premises. Fraud vitiates all civil agreements." I gestured to Deputy Miller. The deputy stepped down the stairs, unholstering a thick manila folder from his leather clipboard. He descended the marble steps until he stood directly in front of Sylvia. "Sylvia Vance," Deputy Miller announced, his voice carrying the full weight of the county court. "I am serving you with an immediate emergency writ of possession on behalf of the Ironwood Trust. The court has declared any claim of tenancy void due to ongoing federal criminal proceedings. You are hereby ordered to vacate these premises immediately." Miller thrust the paperwork into Sylvia's trembling hands. The heavy paper brushed against her fingers, but she did not grip it. The pages slipped from her grasp, fluttering down onto the cold, wet cobblestones of the driveway. "No?" Sylvia sobbed, dropping to her knees on the stone steps, clawing at the deputy's trousers. "Please, this is my home. I have lived here for 12 years. My friends, my reputation, my entire life is in this house, Mary. Please, I am your mother." She deployed the mother card, the exact manipulation she had used for over a decade to extract my money, pay her taxes, and finance her country club facade. I stood on the porch, looking down at the woman weeping on the steps. I felt no anger. I felt no familial guilt. The silent endurance of my 20s was dead and buried. "You ceased being my mother the moment you locked that gate and declared me dead to you," I replied, my eyes locking onto hers with terrifying finality. "This is not your home. It has never been your home. You were merely an occupant who forgot who owned the foundation." Deputy Miller took a step back, pulling his arm free from Sylvia's desperate grasp. "Stand up, ma'am," the deputy ordered, his voice hard. "You have 20 minutes to collect your essential personal effects under our direct supervision. Anything left behind will be considered abandoned property. Move now, or I will place you under arrest for criminal trespass." The illusion shattered. The fortress had fallen. Sylvia and Kelsey remained huddled on the cold stone steps, stripped of their arrogance, their wealth, and their dignity, with nowhere left to run. Deputy Miller broke the paralysis gripping the stone steps. He placed a heavy hand on the radio, holstered at his tactical belt, and gestured toward the open mahogany double doors. "Inside," Miller commanded, his voice clipping through the cold autumn wind. The clock started. Sylvia and Kelsey stumbled up the remaining stairs. They crossed the threshold not as aristocratic owners holding court, but as desperate trespassers racing a stopwatch. I remained in the foyer, stepping aside to let the armed deputies flank them. The grand chandelier cast a brilliant light across the marble floor, illuminating the sheer panic radiating from their bodies. Miller produced 2 heavy-duty, black contractor garbage bags from his squad car supply. He tossed them onto the polished stone. The thick plastic slapped against the marble, a harsh, utilitarian sound echoing through the expansive entryway. "Fill them," Miller instructed, pointing down at the black plastic. "Clothing and essential personal toiletries only. You will not remove fixtures, electronics, or furniture. My partner and I will shadow your every movement to ensure compliance." Kelsey stared at the black contractor bags, the reality of packing her curated designer existence into literal garbage receptacles shattered the final remnants of her composure. She snatched one of the bags, her manicured nails digging into the plastic, and sprinted up the grand mahogany staircase. Her breathing echoed in ragged, panicked gasps. Sylvia moved slower. The shock calcified her joints. She picked up the remaining bag, her hands trembling so violently the plastic rustled continuously. She ascended the stairs, her shoulders slumped, followed closely by the second deputy. I did not follow them. I stood at the base of the staircase, folding my hands in front of me, listening to the frantic, chaotic dismantling of their fabricated empire. From the east wing, the sounds of destruction erupted. Wooden hangers snapped loudly, hitting the hardwood floor. Closet doors slammed against the drywall. Kelsey shrieked, the sound raw, guttural, and stripped of all her usual high society pretension. "It does not fit," Kelsey screamed. I heard the distinct tearing of delicate fabric, likely a silk gown catching on the zipper of a leather boot. "None of it fits. The bag is tearing." Sylvia hurried down the hallway toward Kelsey's sprawling suite. "Just pack the essentials. Kelsey, leave the winter coats. We will hire a lawyer. We will fight this eviction in court." Kelsey whirled around, bursting through her bedroom door to confront her mother in the corridor. She hurled a velvet shoebox toward Sylvia. The box missed her head, striking the wainscoting and spilling designer heels across the polished oak floorboards. "Fight this with what money?" Kelsey shrieked, her face contorted in absolute, vicious fury. She pointed a shaking finger directly at Sylvia's chest. "My credit cards declined at the boutique. My bank accounts remain locked under a federal hold. You told me Trent possessed unlimited capital. You told me the $5 million loan cleared." "It was supposed to clear," Sylvia pleaded, backing away from the venom radiating from her golden child. She clutched the empty garbage bag against her stomach like a shield. "The venture capital firm promised to release the funds this morning." "You gave him a fake deed," Kelsey interrupted, her voice cracking into a hysterical, breathless sob. She grabbed handfuls of her own hair, pulling the blonde strands in blind panic. "You forged Mary's signature on federal collateral documents. The deputies just told us Trent sits in a federal holding cell. You dragged me into a bank fraud conspiracy, and now the Federal Bureau of Investigation is hunting us down." The toxic dynamic imploded in real time. For 12 years, Sylvia shielded Kelsey from consequence, feeding her an endless diet of unearned luxury, subsidizing her arrogance with my hidden capital. The moment the luxury evaporated, the loyalty disintegrated completely. Kelsey did not offer comfort, she offered absolute vicious blame, sacrificing her mother without a second of hesitation to save herself. "I did it for you," Sylvia sobbed, her hands reaching out in a desperate, pleading gesture. Tears ruined her heavy makeup, cutting dark streaks down her cheeks. "I sacrificed everything to secure your wedding, to secure your future." "You ruined my life," Kelsey spat, turning her back on her mother. She dropped to her knees, frantically shoving imported lace and cashmere sweaters into the black garbage bag, crying uncontrollably as the plastic stretched and strained around her possessions. Sylvia stood paralyzed in the hallway. Kelsey's total rejection severed the last tether holding Sylvia's mind together. The gravity of the federal charges finally bypassed her dense layers of denial and crashed violently into her nervous system. Federal forgery, wire fraud, decades in a federal penitentiary. Sylvia staggered backward. Her shoulders hit the hallway wall. She clawed at the collar of her designer coat, her chest heaving in rapid, shallow jerks. She gasped for air, but her panicked lungs refused to expand. A string of pearls snapped under her desperate fingers. The iridescent beads cascaded down her chest, bouncing rapidly down the grand staircase, pinging sharply against the marble foyer below. She hyperventilated. The matriarch who ruled the country club, who mocked my career at the dinner table, who locked me out of my own estate on Friday night, collapsed into a wheezing, terrified heap against the baseboards. She clutched her chest, her eyes wide and staring blankly at the ceiling, entirely consumed by the realization that she possessed no escape route. "Time is up," Deputy Miller announced, stepping out of the master suite. His heavy boots sounded a definitive death knell against the hardwood floor. "Bring the bags downstairs. Move now." The deputies did not offer physical assistance. They corralled the two women, forcing them toward the staircase. Sylvia and Kelsey descended the stairs. They dragged the bulging, heavy black garbage bags behind them. The plastic scraped against the mahogany steps, snagging on the edges and leaving dull streaks in the polish. Kelsey's mascara ran in thick, dark tracks down her pale face. Sylvia moved with a vacant, shuffling gait, her eyes staring blankly at the floorboards, a ghost haunting her own eviction. They reached the marble foyer. I stood exactly where I planted myself 20 minutes prior. I did not cross my arms. I did not gloat. I did not raise my voice to hurl final insults. I offered them the exact same cold, deadpan stare they offered me through the surveillance camera on Friday afternoon when they toasted to my banishment. Sylvia looked up. Her eyes met mine. She dropped the twisted plastic neck of her garbage bag. She opened her mouth, a desperate final plea forming on her trembling lips. She wanted to beg. She wanted to invoke the bloodline, to demand a reprieve from the daughter she squeezed dry for over a decade. She wanted me to fix the catastrophic destruction she brought upon herself. I did not let her speak. I held her gaze, rendering my expression entirely devoid of mercy, and slightly tilted my head toward the open front door. The message transmitted with absolute, terrifying clarity. The bridge burned completely. I possessed no forgiveness. Deputy Miller stepped between us, placing a firm, unyielding hand on Sylvia's shoulder, physically guiding her toward the exit. "Let us go, ma'am. Off the property. Keep moving." Kelsey did not look at me. She hauled her trash bag over the threshold, her head bowed in profound, inescapable shame. Sylvia stumbled after her, her designer shoes slipping slightly on the wet stone porch. I stepped forward, gripping the heavy brass handle of the front door. I watched them descend the stone stairs. I watched them step onto the cobblestone driveway. They possessed no luxury vehicle waiting to whisk them away. They possessed no digital funds to secure a hotel room. They carried the fractured, wrinkled remains of their aristocratic illusion in black plastic bags. The federal indictments waited for them in the shadows, ready to strip away whatever freedom they still managed to hold. They marched down the long, winding driveway, retreating into the biting autumn wind, their figures shrinking against the vast landscape of the estate. I pulled the heavy mahogany door shut. The brass deadbolt slid into place with a sharp, echoing snap. The estate plunged into complete, undisturbed silence. The digital locks held, the physical perimeter secured. The fortress belonged entirely to me. 6 months evaporated. The bitter, freezing rain of October surrendered to the mild, steady warmth of April. I sit in the east wing of the estate, positioned behind a sprawling mahogany desk. I repurposed the formal sitting room, stripping away the velvet antique furniture Sylvia hoarded, transforming the space into the nerve center of my independent cybersecurity consulting firm. Rack-mounted servers hum quietly in the corner, processing encrypted data packets for multinational corporate clients. The heavy mahogany door remains open. The air in the house feels entirely different now. It lacks the suffocating, toxic density of unearned entitlement. The silence no longer carries the weight of a looming ambush. It simply hums with absolute, undisturbed peace. The scales of justice ground down with spectacular, crushing velocity, obliterating the architects of the October conspiracy. Trent did not secure a brilliant corporate defense attorney to magically erase the data I handed to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The digital footprint I extracted from his unencrypted cloud server provided the prosecutors with an airtight, impenetrable narrative. The jury did not deliberate for days. They required a mere 4 hours to review the forged quitclaim deed, the offshore routing hashes, and the communication logs connecting his enterprise to the Macau gambling syndicate. The judge delivered a 15-year federal sentence. There is no parole in the federal penal system. The Silicon Valley disruptor, the man who paced my stone patio screaming at debt collectors while wearing oversized platinum watches, traded his midnight blue velvet dinner jackets for a standard-issue khaki jumpsuit. Federal marshals escorted him out of the courtroom, his wrists bound by heavy steel chains. He will spend the next decade and a half in a medium-security federal penitentiary, assigned to a rigid, dictated schedule. Completely stripped of his autonomy, the syndicate he attempted to defraud collapsed under the weight of the federal dragnet. His fabricated tech empire disintegrated, leaving behind nothing but a digital graveyard of seized assets and public disgrace. Sylvia evaded the penitentiary walls, but she did not evade her prison. When the prosecutors presented the high-definition scan of the forged deed and the audio recording of her explicit confession, Sylvia's arrogance finally fractured. Her public defender outlined the devastating reality of a federal trial. terrified of spending her twilight years in a concrete cell. She accepted a brutal plea agreement. She pled guilty to a single count of aggravated forgery, forfeiting her right to a trial in exchange for a suspended sentence and 5 years of strict house arrest. She no longer curates guest lists or dictates catering menus for lavish estate galas. The court relocated her to a cramped 300-square-foot studio apartment on the industrial outskirts of the city. Stained linoleum replaced the imported marble. The roar of a nearby interstate replaced the tranquil silence of the ancient oaks. A heavy black electronic monitor rests permanently locked around her ankle. A green light blinks against her skin, transmitting her exact global positioning coordinates to a federal probation officer 24 hours a day if she steps beyond the threshold of her front door without prior authorization. The monitor triggers a silent alarm, and a patrol car arrives to haul her directly to a holding cell. She spends her days staring at peeling paint, completely isolated from the country club peers who instantly erased her name from their social registries the moment the federal indictments hit the local news cycle. Kelsey crashed into the harshest reality of all, stripped of my hidden financial subsidization and abandoned by the imprisoned grifter she intended to marry. Kelsey faced a world that demanded actual competence. The federal government seized the remaining scraps of Sylvia's legitimate bank accounts to cover court fees and mandatory restitution. The designer wardrobe Kelsey packed into black garbage bags on the day of her eviction barely covered the retainer for her initial legal consultations. She never submitted a resume in her 20s. She now wears a stiff polyester uniform, standing on her feet for 8 hours a day behind the cash register of a discount retail outlet. She scans barcodes. She folds clearance merchandise. She hands crumpled receipts to customers who do not even look at her face. The minimum wage salary she earns routes almost entirely to a designated escrow account, continuously garnished to pay off the mounting, suffocating legal debts generated by her participation in the collateral fraud. She returns to a cheap, rented bedroom every night, her manicured nails chipped and broken, burdened by the agonizing daily reminder of the aristocratic illusion she permanently shattered. They gambled my estate to secure an unearned empire, and the house collected every single chip they threw onto the table. I lean back in my ergonomic chair, sipping a glass of iced water. I look out the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the spring breeze rustle the leaves of the ancient oaks lining the driveway. I did not inherit this view. I did not steal this property. I did not forge a signature to claim this territory. I built it. I funded the foundation with 12 years of relentless, agonizing labor. I secured the perimeter through elite, uncompromising expertise. The overarching lesson here is that true power cannot be inherited, stolen, or forged. It is built through relentless competence and unshakable integrity. When you shrink yourself to fit into a toxic family's narrative, you surrender the keys to your own castle, allowing parasites to feed on your stability. You construct an illusion of peace while they actively mine your foundation for their own benefit. But the moment you stop shrinking, the dynamic shatters. When you draw a hard, immovable boundary and refuse to subsidize their delusions, you strip them of their power over you, proving that your boundaries are far stronger than their manipulation. Toxic individuals mistake silent endurance for weakness. They assume your loyalty guarantees your compliance. You must show them that a quiet observer absorbs the data, maps the vulnerabilities, and holds the absolute capacity to dismantle their entire reality with a single, decisive strike. Never apologize for protecting the empire you built with your own 2 hands. Thank you so much for joining me today. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, share your thoughts on establishing firm boundaries in the comments, and subscribe for more stories of justice and resilience. Stay strong, and goodbye for now.